Hello, today on my channel you will hear an amazing story about life. I hope you enjoy this story. This one struck me to the core. Honestly, I still can't forget it. Enjoy watching.
A nurse blew a big deal to a rich man by overhearing his wife talking to her lover, and by breaking the pact. After her husband left the family, Emily was left alone with 2 young children. Frankly, it was a blow, a shock. She had never imagined that there was anything wrong with their family. On the contrary, they seemed happy. And then the woman had a harsh confrontation with reality. Her husband Andrew did not even find the strength to explain himself to her, to talk, to clarify the situation. No, he acted like a coward, like a complete scoundrel. He left quietly, wrote a tiny note, and ran away. In fact, silently packed up all his things and left the flat while Emily and the kids were at the clinic. But who does that? Is that dignified? Is that what you expect from the man you lived under the same roof with, had children with? And this note. Emily will never forget this concision from her ex-husband. I can't take it anymore. I'm leaving simply and clearly, so that the woman did not build vain illusions. It was incredibly, simply unbearably painful. Emily couldn't get it into her head. How could he do this to her, to the children? Of course, she rushed to call, only the caller was no longer available. Andrew hadn't run off in a hurry, silently, to explain himself later. Worse, Andrew didn't just run off into the unknown. He took the family's savings with him, took everything they had. Needless to say, the man did not think to pay child support for his children either. It turned out that the monetary collapse was a much bigger shock than the love betrayal. That pain was only emotional, and in the situation with money, Emily faced complete hopelessness and hopelessness. And it would have been fine if she were alone, but she had children on her hands. They needed to be fed, clothed, and how? The unfortunate woman realized quite quickly that tears could not help her grief. You can sit and feel sorry for yourself endlessly, but this will not bring any changes. Food will not appear in the fridge, and money will not fall on the card. I had to pull myself together and act. Through can't and through don't want to pull herself out of the emotional pit for the sake of the children, for their well-being and happy childhood. Emily couldn't afford to let them down, to betray them as her own father had betrayed her. There were no options. It was necessary to start with the smallest and most obvious. First of all, the young woman decided to move in with her mother in her flat. A small flat in the city, Emily and her mom's inheritance. It could be rented out. There was already some money coming in. In the meantime, she could live in the countryside, in a small village with her retired mom. It's even better for the children. Emily tried to reassure herself. In the air, on natural products. In any case, there were no other options. She couldn't even afford to pay the rent. And to go to work, she had to leave her children on someone. Unfortunately, the queue for kindergarten was still not approaching, and Emily could only dream of hiring a nanny. Now, such a luxury she obviously could not afford. Of course, the village is not a city, but there will be at least some opportunity to work part-time, to put drips, injections. After all, Emily had been a nurse before her maternity leave. It's not ideal. But what is better to stay in the city, and in the near future to go to bread and water, begging? Emily preferred honest labor. That's right, don't be a fool. Mrs. Mia fully supported her daughter's decision. I told you a long time ago that you should move with the children to my place. They'll be at ease here, they'll enjoy the fresh air. There's lots of other kids here. Why bother? There was no other way out anyway. I'm almost out of money. I used the last pennies to pay the rent and bought some minimal groceries. I've already found tenants. Seemed like normal people. I've got my things ready and packed. So there's no turning back, Emily sighed bitterly. The idea of returning to her mother in her native village was not very close to her. What was the point of embarrassing Mrs. Mia, a sick pensioner? She loved her grandchildren, of course, but seeing them occasionally or living and looking after 2 children all the time were different things. I didn't want to impose, to force my mom to solve her problems. Emily was not used to help. She became independent early. So the current circumstances forced the woman to literally overcome her fears and expectations. It's okay, Smith. Everything will be all right, Mrs. Mia rejoiced. You'll see, Mrs. Mia said. Well, it happens. Everyone goes through black and gray streaks in life. Who hasn't been betrayed in this life? You just have to learn from it and move on. Yes, Mum, I understand, Emily replied. I don't have time to be discouraged. As soon as we get here, we'll have to find clients and patients so that we can make some money on top of the rent. I can't just sit on your back. Don't worry. I've already told Aunt Amanda. She'll tell everyone you're here and that you need a job. You know how we are with medical care. So I'm sure you'll find someone quickly. It'd be nice if the neighboring village heard about you. People there have good money. They can afford to pay and hire a nurse. Yes, that would be ideal, Emily said dreamily. Indeed, about 10 years ago, a new township for the rich had sprung up in their neighborhood. Apparently they were attracted by nature, fresh air, a lake nearby. Of course, they needed servants and staff. The rich preferred to hire them in the neighboring villages. You can't travel from the city. 5 kilometers away and you're there. Emily's journey was no more than 3.5 kilometers in a straight line, through a forest path. What are they going to do on a bicycle when there's no snow? So the nurse, of course, hoped that there would be patients for her there too. The well-to-do could afford to pay for medical services. It's always easier to take money from someone who has it. Emily knew that she would still take crumbs from some retired grandmother. She couldn't get over herself. That's her upbringing. So Emily and her children moved to their native land, and at first everything seemed sad, anxious. But in reality, everything appeared in a completely different light. The children, a very tiny 2-year-old Anne and 5-year-old Matthew, took the new home with great enthusiasm. Of course, they were cramped in the flat, but here they have space. Everything is interesting, where now city children could see a real cow, goat, and piglets. All in all, the children were delighted. Mum, but we'll live here for a while. The son kept pestering his mother. Yes, we're not going back to town just yet. No, Matthew, I think we'll stay here for a while, Emily smiled. Her heart rejoiced that the children were happy. Wasn't that the most important thing to a mother? Emily was very worried about her children. Did she have anything more precious than them? So gradually, little by little, life began to get better, to get back on track. There were no more fears, you just had to move forward. Especially since Emily simply had no way out. How could she give up, admit her weakness? Only her husband Andrew was capable of that, but not her. Emily did her best to keep her children happy, to make sure that Matthew and Anne didn't need anything. It's not their fault their mum picked such a lousy father for them, she told herself. It wasn't their fault, and it wasn't their fault, and it wasn't their responsibility. What's more, Mum Mrs. Mia had to be taken care of too. It was only now, living with her under the same roof, that her daughter noticed that she had given up a lot lately. And who would take care of them all but her? Who needs them? So regardless, Emily rolled up her sleeves and got to work. There was a lot of walking, cycling, a lot of socializing with seriously ill people. Of course, it was very exhausting both mentally and physically. But the nurse did not think to complain. Everything was going the way she wanted it to. There are patients who are able to pay for the work the same huge thanks. In such a situation, to grumble and complain is only to anger God. When the first regular clients started to appear, life in general began to shine with new colors. Finally gone that negativity of hopelessness and helplessness. And that was the most important thing. In this rhythm of life, the nurse survived for the 3rd month. Everything suited her. Especially fooled the woman that now was not ashamed to look children in the eyes, not refusing in trifles, for which bail lack of money. One day, Emily cycled to a neighboring village to visit her regular patient, to whom she was giving vitamin drips to maintain her general tone and health. The nurse liked Mrs. Jane very much. She paid well, she could afford it, she joked, she laughed, she didn't look down on the nurse. I've had my share of that. Their relationship was good, even friendly. Emily's mood that day was combative and upbeat. Mrs. Jane offered her a coffee after the drip. She didn't refuse. The women chatted about nothing, about life. Oops. The patient suddenly came to her senses, clearly remembering something. What a crow. I promised to talk to you and it slipped my mind. Emily was very interested. It would be nice if Mrs. Jane could recommend a nurse to some well-to-do neighbor. Something not quite your profile, she said. But she promised to ask. Maybe you'd be interested. We've got the biggest house in the village on Main Street. Do you know it?" The nurse nodded patiently. Of course, it was hard to miss. The owners had obviously invested a great deal in the house, in its decoration. It was clear and visible to the naked eye. The high fence, designed to hide the splendor, only attracted the attention of the curious even more. "They're looking for a nurse for the dying master," said Mrs. Jane. "He's in very bad health. It looks like terminal cancer. He needs someone with a medical degree. His previous carer left the other day." "It's understandable. You have to live here. You can't travel from the city," she continued. "What do you think? Not interested? I could recommend you. The salary, I'm sure, is very decent." Emily had her doubts. It's full-time. What about the kids? What about Mum? They can't manage without her, she thought. So Mrs. Mia would have to take care of all the worries and problems. No, it was absolutely impossible to make such a big decision without her. "Can I think about it?" replied the nurse politely. "I have children, Mum. You know, you have to weigh everything up and think it over." Of course, Mrs. Jane shrugged her shoulders. "Well, think, call." All the way back, Emily thought about the offer. A huge number of disadvantages: full-time work, a seriously ill person, constant presence in someone else's house. But there was a significant upside: the salary. And what to do? Back home, without putting things off, she called her mum in for a chat, told Mrs. Mia everything she knew. "What do you think?" Emily asked. "There are a lot of downsides, but I'm sure the labor will be well paid. You know, money's no object right now. But I don't want to make a decision without you. I mean, this is about you, too." "I think I can manage with the children," replied Mum. "There's no problem with that. After all, I understand that you can't live long with terminal cancer, right? It doesn't even last long. I'm more concerned about your morale. Being alone with a dying person all the time." "Don't worry, it's my job," she smiled as calmly as possible. She didn't want to upset her mother further. It was absolutely unnecessary. "Are you sure, Mum? You'll have a lot to worry about," Emily said. "I think we should at least try to talk about the terms in more detail, find out what and how, so you don't regret the opportunity. Fair enough?" "I'll do that," she nodded to her mum. It was early in the morning when the nurse called Mrs. Jane back. "Hello, Mrs. Smith," she said good-naturedly. "Good afternoon." "I'm sorry to disturb you," said Emily. "Can you tell me about the offer you made yesterday? Is it still valid?" The nurse came straight to the point. "I need to contact the landlady, Mrs. Chloe, and then I'll know." "I'll ring her. Ask her. If you still need a member of staff, she'll call you back. I'll give her your number." "That'll do," Emily said. "Yes, of course, thank you so much." "You're welcome." Mrs. Jane replied politely and disconnected. It was as if she were glad to be a part of someone else's fate. Indeed, not an hour later, Emily's phone came to life, calling an unknown number. It was the same Mrs. Chloe. A carer was still needed. They were on the lookout for a decent person and a professional. As the landlady immediately indicated, judging by the voice, it was a middle-aged woman, quite polite, Emily thought. There was a slight swagger and arrogance in her tone, but within acceptable limits. After all, by then she was used to worse treatment from those in power. The lady invited Emily for an interview, reasonably noting that they should look at each other in person, and then discuss the terms of employment in detail. By lunchtime, Emily arrived at the same luxurious house. A little worried inside, she reassured herself that she had not agreed to anything yet. As long as they only discussed the terms in detail, one could always politely decline. She's human too, after all, she has a right? That gave Emily's confidence a little boost. Surprisingly, the owner of the house, the wife of Emily's potential patient, Mrs. Chloe, seemed very friendly and calm. Periodically in this village, she was no longer surprised at the rudeness or neglect. But calmness and good-naturedness really struck her with novelty. Of course, there were exceptions. For example, the wonderful Mrs. Jane. But they were few, unfortunately. Mrs. Chloe gave Emily a detailed outline of her tasks and responsibilities. The pay was indeed magnificent. The nurse was overwhelmed by the generosity of the owners. Of course, the services were not free. The demands on the nurse were also very high. The most unpleasant news for Emily was that the owners required the nurse to live right here, in their house, to be with the patient. However, she was given 1 day off a week Sunday, of course with the proviso that nothing extraordinary happened, and the patient was stable. So what was to be done? What was to be done? Emily was confused. With her mum, she had discussed at least a partial presence at home. Mrs. Mia was brave, but what would she be like with the kids 6 days a week, 24 hours a day? On the other hand, Mum wouldn't understand if Emily said no. Meanwhile, the landlady, noticing the confusion in Emily's eyes, wasn't about to give up. "I know it's a lot to ask," she said, "but my husband, Mr. Matthew, needs round-the-clock care. He's hard to get along with people and hard to get along with new acquaintances. But you must admit, we are prepared to pay a decent fee for your services," said Mrs. Chloe. "Of course, there is no question about that," Emily responded. "Just understand me. It's not an easy choice. I have a mum and 2 young children at home." Mrs. Chloe's face showed disappointment. Weighing the pros and cons carefully again, Emily decided to take the job. The pay was too good. It was a sin to refuse. If Mum was having a hard time, she could find a nanny too. With the income she had, she could afford it. Especially since jobs were scarce in their town. Local girls would gladly agree to look after children not for fabulous sums. It was decided. Among other things, there were some other rules, which the hostess thoroughly voiced at once. Some of them confused the prospective carer a little. For example, Mrs. Chloe wanted to be aware of absolutely everything that happens to her husband. His state of health, of course, was part of her affairs. But the list didn't stop there. The spouse seemed to ask additionally to spy on the dying. Or was that just Emily's impression? The nurse had assumed that Mr. Matthew was the first to be satisfied with her services. In fact, it appeared that Mrs. Chloe was the center of all decision-making for her husband. This confused Emily, but she quickly worked out a logical explanation for herself. Perhaps Mrs. Chloe was showing her love and concern for the dying man by such suffocating control. It happens, doesn't it? People are different and deal with stress and grief in different ways. It would have been possible to have a long internal dialogue, to doubt, to search for arguments, to wonder. But what good was that going to do? Emily resolutely reminded herself that her job was to serve. What was she, in fact, a servant? What right does she have to meddle in the relationship of spouses, especially in such a difficult life situation? It is necessary to remember their place and the circle of duties, fulfill them as agreed. After all, she was warned about everything at once. So what now? Now that that's settled, it's time to meet your ward. Mr. Matthew surprised Emily at first sight. For one thing, he was much older than she'd realized. She had probably inferred this from the age of his wife, thinking they were almost the same age. In fact, it turned out that the man was about 20 to 25 years older than his wife. If Mrs. Chloe gave the impression of a blooming and well-groomed middle-aged woman, Mr. Matthew, it was immediately obvious, was at a rather advanced age. And of course, illness does not make anyone look young or beautiful. That the patient was seriously ill was evident without a word. He was thin to the point of dryness, his face was grayish-yellow, and his eyes were tired and sore. However, Mrs. Chloe confirmed her husband's diagnosis, which her neighbor Mrs. Jane had given Emily. The man had terminal kidney cancer. There was nothing that could be done. There was no miracle. No, all the patient needed now was to relieve the pain and support his body as best he could. Emily was a familiar person, so surprise was not reflected on her face. On the contrary, she stepped towards the prospective patient with a good-natured smile. "Good afternoon, Mr. Matthew. I'm Emily, your nurse, if you'll excuse me." "Hello," the man said hoarsely. "Well, let's get acquainted. Chloe, you can go on. I can do it myself," he turned to his wife, who brought the nurse. The woman nodded and immediately retreated. It was clear at once that no one argues or bickers with the owner of the house. If anything is done against his will, it is done secretly behind his back. As soon as the wife went out and closed the door behind her, the man turned to Emily again. "Please sit down. Now I need to look at you closely to decide if you're right for me." Strange. The owner of the house spoke very politely, calmly, unusually respectful and intelligent. But still Emily's insides clenched. She didn't remember the rest of her conversation with Mr. Matthew very well. For the most part, it was like an interrogation. The patient asked questions, looking at her with challenge and interest. He seemed less interested in the answers themselves than in the nurse's reactions. Emily was terribly frightened and almost mesmerized by this tired stare across the room. Finally, Mr. Matthew clapped his hands on his leg. "Yes, you're definitely the right man for me. I apologize for asking you. I may have overstepped the mark somewhere. But you see, I had to realize who I was going to spend the rest of my life with." It was a bold and even impertinent statement. What was I supposed to say to him? It was foolish to refuse and say that everything was still ahead of me. There was no reason to give up on herself. It would only offend the man, because everything is already clear. Why this pretense? So Emily could only squeeze out a neutral word. "I understand perfectly." The next day, from the very early morning, Emily was picked up from the house by a driver. That was the arrangement, because the carer had to take her personal belongings with her. That's how her work at the home began. She drove to the neighboring town with mixed feelings. To be honest, she was already regretting and corrupting herself for taking the job. She was really intimidated by Mr. Matthew, his tenacious gaze as if he could look deep inside. Strangely, on the first day of work, the patient no longer looked so intimidating. On the contrary, the man was joking, trying to lighten the mood. There was no trace of that awful feeling of heaviness. Emily began to exhale a little, as she had to adapt to her new circumstances. It might seem silly, but the woman's anxiety wasn't going anywhere, not by a long shot. She was terribly uncomfortable in this house. Why? At first, Emily wrote it off to the lack of habit to live in such luxury, to adapt to new realities and new people around. But no, there were strange things about it. From the first days of her life in the mansion, the observant Emily began to notice something wrong. She seemed to be the mistress of the house, so intelligent, calm, polite. But everyone in the house walks on tiptoe in front of her and is clearly afraid of her. Why? Isn't it strange? It would be understandable if Mrs. Chloe were a tyrannical tyrant. But no, the nurse hasn't noticed anything like that about her. Not yet, anyway. Or was it just her? Was the landlady more demanding of the others? The house was as quiet as a crypt. For a mother of 2 children, accustomed to children's laughter, screams, and various sounds, this silence was terribly unusual. This, too, was blamed on the peculiarities of the character of the owners. Few people are sensitive to sounds. Why not? Then the nurse learnt that no one was allowed to appear at the landlady's house without Mrs. Chloe calling. There was a floor of the house, the last, 3rd floor, and no one was allowed to go up there without prior approval. Even the maid cleaned there in the presence of the mistress. Strange, isn't it? Usually it was the other way around. It surprised Emily so much that she couldn't stand it and asked Amanda, the head housekeeper who was in charge of all the staff, a direct question. Why is it like this? Isn't it strange? But the curiosity was immediately condemned. Amanda coldly glared at the woman who was prying. Emily, she said formally and firmly, in this house you don't ask questions, you just follow orders or you're out of here in a flash. She got what she deserved, of course. As they say, curiosity is not a vice, but it's a big pig. That's true. Except that the nurse couldn't rest. And these secrets, this arrogant answer of Amanda's only made her want to know what was going on. In her free time, Emily began to look around, to listen discreetly, and slowly from the others showed interest in the 3rd floor of the house. It was just awfully interesting to find out what it was all about. But you can't guard nothing so meticulously if there's no mystery to it, can you? And one had to amuse oneself. Mr. Matthew grew tired very quickly and often dozed off. It was soon discovered that Mrs. Chloe had an additional entrance to her 3rd floor. So yes, it was accessed in the traditional way, simply by going up the main staircase. But there was an additional route. Emily had learned about it quite by accident. At night she couldn't sleep, so she read by the window with her e-reader open, without turning on the light. She enjoyed occasionally looking up from her book and gazing at the beautiful moon. The view from the 1st floor of the house was magical because of the proximity of the water. The nurse was distracted from her book by the sound of the front gate opening. Needless to say, she began to watch carefully to see what was going on, who could be arriving at 3 a.m. The car was unfamiliar to her, but she couldn't see much. The car instantly rolled away into the garage. No one ever came out of the garage. Yes, there was an entrance to the house, but the woman would have heard it. The door from there was almost directly below her room. But there were sounds on the 3rd floor. Something was going on up there. Too bad it was impossible to make out anything. The soundproofing in the house was excellent, but there could be no doubt. Whoever this night visitor was, he bypassed the first floor of the house and went straight up to Mrs. Chloe's apartment. The conclusion lay on the surface. In the huge house there were additional passages, entrances of which not everyone was aware. Now it became clear that the landlady was so sensitive about unexpected visitors to her floor. She did not need unnecessary witnesses. Even if it was still unsubstantiated, Emily was convinced in her heart that her mistress was visited by her lover at night in secret. Why not? She thought. She's still a fairly young woman. Nature takes its course. Though it was a bit of a shame about Mr. Matthew. What about him? It was only the woman's inner torment. There was no thought of intruding into the private affairs of the couple. She had satisfied her curiosity. Now everything fell into place. It was simple, even banal. The secret of the lady of the house was as old as the world. From that day on, Emily was completely at ease. Why was she afraid she'd stumble upon some scary skeletons in the wardrobe? What was really to be feared? And a lover, what a thing. Except that the nurse's previous interest did not go unnoticed by the house staff. Kate, the young housekeeper maid, even decided to give her colleague some unsolicited advice over a cup of tea. And the girl, lowering her voice, said, "It's none of my business, but I'd like to warn you. Be aware that in this house snitch on snitch. Don't lose your job because of your long nose." Emily pretended not to understand what she was talking about. "Why would I be in trouble?" "I don't get it, Kate. What are you talking about?" "Everyone here knows you've been asking Amanda all sorts of questions about her mistress's oddities," the maid retorted. The nurse wasn't about to give up and just shrugged. It just seemed odd. So I asked her if there was anything she needed to know. "Maybe Mrs. Chloe's got a crocodile living there. How would I know?" Emily said, deliberately slipping into absurdity to nip this conversation in the bud. She didn't like what Kate had said, and she didn't want to continue this conversation. She didn't want to involve herself in these internal matters. "Come on, have you seen Mrs. Chloe's lover yet?" Kate asked her forehead. Only Emily decided to use the advice that had just come to keep her mouth shut. I mean, there are snitches. "I don't know what you're talking about right now," Kate the nurse said as seriously as she could. Why did she want to go to all this trouble? Kate was defiantly silent in response. Of course she didn't believe it, but she had no evidence to the contrary, which was a good thing. Emily hadn't even told her mum about seeing a mysterious overnight visitor who'd inexplicably ended up on the top floor of the house. She didn't need all that smutty gossip and idle talk. The nurse reasoned pragmatically her career in this house was fleeting, so it was a great folly to ask questions and show interest. She should have been smarter than that. To go about her business quietly, stay out of the way, get paid, and exist quietly and peacefully with everyone under the same roof. After Mr. Matthew's death, Emily would have to look for a new job, and the widow's recommendations would be useful. Cynical, I suppose, but it's the truth of life. To take her mind off what was going on in the house, Emily went to work. She was already very conscientious about her duties, and now she was concentrating on Mr. Matthew. She tried to do her best to make the patient feel as good as possible, both physically and mentally. It was her job to relieve the man's condition, which Emily did from morning to night. At first, they got to know each other. The businessman was wary of the nurse. His character and difficult life and professional path strongly affected his attitude to people and to life in general. After a while, when Mr. Matthew got used to the carer, he began to treat her more and more warmly. He told her things, showed her things, explained things. It must be said that Emily was also very interested. She admired the man's life, his experience and knowledge. The patient found in the nurse an outlet. He could see that Emily was completely sincere about him. Yes, she worked here, but it was not her job to feign curiosity or interest, to talk about herself, to share news. Mr. Matthew, in turn, was interested in the woman's life, children, her life in general. As it turned out, despite the huge money, the businessman was now very lonely. The disease had done a terrible thing to him, cut off the way to communicate with the world. His strength was not the same. His health was failing. He could no longer afford to go about his business, to solve problems, to act. And that was his life. He breathed it. And now he'd been cooped up before Emily came along. In fact, the businessman's entire social circle was his wife and domestic staff. Occasionally, doctors and other medical professionals would show up. Occasionally, when the situation was extraordinary, Mr. Matthew would also be contacted by the manager, on whom the business and affairs now rested. And that, even these contacts were infrequent. All communications were strictly controlled and regulated by Mrs. Chloe. Of course, she was guided primarily by the care of her husband. He was not allowed to strain himself for trifles. The businessman resisted. It seemed to him that the disease is not a verdict. After all, medicine has made such a step forward. But the only thing is that both our and foreign specialists have divorced their hands too late. Unfortunately, the disease had gone too far. To Mr. Matthew's credit, it should be noted that even after hearing the verdict, he did not think of giving up. He believed and hoped that everything was still ahead of him, that a miracle would happen. The man did not think to slow down the old pace of life, to change his hardened habits. And that's when his body gave up. In addition to the underlying disease, the man had a heart attack. This finally crippled him. "Are you in a big hurry to get to the other side?" resented, without hiding his emotions, the attending physician. It was natural and fair Mr. Matthew finished his story to Emily. Health is not ironclad, as it turned out. Suddenly I was aging, like all mortals. I didn't want to believe it. The nurse nodded sympathetically. She understood the old man's emotions. How many times she had heard such stories from her patients. Yes, unfortunately, a man realizes that he is mortal and fragile too late. Now, Mrs. Chloe took this situation into consideration and began to use it as a final argument in any dispute with her husband. In this way, she managed to restrict his communication and put him in the house. The patient complained. "Now, Chloe always tells me that it's not enough what happened. Don't you get it the first time? What can you say? What can you say?" Emily understood one thing: Mr. Matthew was very unhappy with the situation, but could not do anything. He was very ill indeed, and it was not even within his manly power to change anything. His vulnerability was enormous. She felt sorry for this elderly, tired, dying man. But what could she do? Except sit and chat, try to cheer him up or make him laugh, play his favorite game of backgammon. Whatever was within her power and her modest capabilities, Emily was happy to do. It was such a pleasure to see the old man's face sometimes genuinely light up with warmth and joy. Thoughts of Mr. Matthew never left Emily. Even on the one day off she spent at home with the children and Mrs. Mia's mother. Something was keeping the woman on edge. She couldn't get her patient out of her mind, even though it seemed as if she longed to be with her beloved family. But even away from the mansion, her thoughts overcame her. Mrs. Mia couldn't help but notice the change in her daughter. "So tell me, what's wrong? What's going on in this house? You're not yourself." At first, Emily tried to avoid direct questions. She didn't feel comfortable gossiping, discussing other people's lives. But her mom wouldn't give up. "Daughter, but look at yourself. If it's so terrible, let's leave this job. God, with the money, will get by just fine." The unhappy woman really couldn't find any peace. Who but she knew and felt her daughter. Emily only gave in because her heart was very heavy. There were thoughts of Mr. Matthew and of the situation in the house, and her mother's anguish only added to her neurosis. Moreover, knowing her mother, the woman did not worry this information will not go anywhere beyond these walls and will not become public. And Emily shared all her experiences and observations under the eyes and heavy sighs of Mrs. Mia. "You see, my heart is troubled for him. Leaving him behind makes it hard. Even though I'm coming to see you, I know I'll finally get to see Anne and Matthew off the video link. Daughter, I know you have a heart of gold, but you can't do this. Why do you have to be so hard on yourself? The man is leaving. His journey on earth is almost over. Why kill yourself over him? Especially since it was only his choice that led to such a finale and sunset. I'm not happy, of course, but what can I do? His loneliness cuts me like a knife. And Mrs. Chloe has a lover behind her husband's back. I can't believe it. I wish I'd gone to the old man's house more often." Anyway, Mum strongly advised Emily not to interfere. What's the use of interfering? You realize you're the one who's going to be the one to blame. And who's really going to listen to you? Yes, I understand, Mum, but I feel sorry for him. It's the boredom and loneliness that's killing him more than the illness. and his wife is just manipulating him, pushing his buttons. That's all. But you can't help everyone. Take pity on yourself, on your nervous system. You can help him just by doing what you can. But you can't meddle in other people's affairs, it's too dangerous. The nurse nodded in agreement. Of course, these exhortations from her mother were perfectly logical and fair. No one would argue. But what to do with her feelings and emotions was the question. It had been like this for almost 3 months now. It could not be said that the time flew by quickly, rather strictly on the contrary. Every day in the mansion was a torment for Emily. Oh, how she would love to give up this job. Everything about the house exhausted and irritated her. The more she learned, the more she became involved in the local customs, the worse it became. She was literally short of breath. What money was there? Already everything was no fun. It's amazingly simple. You look at the extremely wealthy people from the outside and only snort disdainfully. What's your problem? Money can buy everything. Emily, too, was a victim of that stereotype. It always seems that way when you're struggling for a pittance. But now the nurse was plunged headfirst into that world, and she wasn't happy about it. God, I'd rather be on the dole than this horror. This money really does spoil people. Mrs. Chloe no longer seemed the same to Emily as when she first met her. Now, having lived with her under the same roof, the woman saw her true nature, her arrogance, saw the consumerist and manipulative attitude to the old man's husband. It was just an unbearable, inhuman sight. Sometimes I wanted to stand up and say, "What are you doing?" But, according to her mother's precept, she humbly kept silent, no matter how sorry she felt for the businessman. Only she was right. Isn't Mr. Matthew to blame for everything? Is it not his fault and his connivance in all that is happening? Didn't he marry young and beautiful? Why should Emily now lay her head on the scaffold to save him because of this? Mrs. Chloe's lover came more and more frequently. His presence in the house was still carefully concealed, but all the household seemed to have known about him for a long time, except the master of the house, of course. Lately, though, the nurse began to think that he, too, had guessed what was going on behind his back. He only kept silent because he couldn't do anything anyway. In general, this environment of endless lies, deceit, self-interest, and inhumanity drove Emily to despair. She sobbed, resisting with all her might. And she would have left, honestly, if it hadn't been for one thing: she didn't want to leave Mr. Matthew. She didn't. Not even it was his own fault. It was his own fault. It was his own fault that he wanted to marry a mannequin. Auto training didn't help. Nothing helped. Instead of rationality was the usual female heartfelt pity. After all, how long did he have left? Emily knew for sure. Not long. And wasn't it worth stepping on the throat of her own song just to brighten the dying man's last days, to keep him from being sad? To amuse him, to entertain him, to distract him from his sad thoughts. After all, there is no guarantee that the new carer will not just be formal about everything. After all, that's all the landlady asked for. Everything else was already Emily's personal initiative. "No, I can't do that. I will be with him until the end," the woman resolutely summed up all her doubts and metamorphoses. After all, she had a conscience, and then she would have to live with the burden on her heart. What was there to be patient about? At least because of this. At least for the sake of herself and her selfishness. After making the final decision, it was somehow easier on her soul. After all, there was no longer that inner pendulum. Now the nurse saw a clear end in front of her: the death of her patient. And she would be with him to the end. A week or so passed, and everything was going relatively smoothly and calmly. Nothing heralded a new blow and a new calamity. This night the nurse, as usual, did not sleep. Damn this house. It really did give the woman sad thoughts and a depressing effect on her psyche. The nurse tiptoed into Mr. Matthew's room. In the dark she could see well at night, and she could navigate the house very well, too. She felt uneasy, so she decided to visit the old man one more time, as she was accustomed to do. Even if there was no call, she still checked on him. There was nothing to worry about. This time everything was quiet. The man was sleeping peacefully, breathing evenly, not a cause for concern. Emily mentally crossed herself. Thank God, all is well. The thing was, Mr. Matthew was looking worse and worse, and the end was clearly near, hence the woman's anxious state of mind was only growing. How long does he have left? A week? A month? No one knew how much longer the tired, powerless organism would struggle, but as the nurse exhaled heavily, relief from her heart, at least for a period of time. There was no sleep in either eye. The nurse decided to go down quietly to the ground floor, walk to the kitchen, and get a drink of water. The nerves made her mouth terribly dry. In order not to attract unnecessary attention of the staff, the nurse decided not to switch on the light. Why? She could see everything perfectly well as it was. She was already familiar with almost every corner of the house, except Mrs. Chloe's room on the third floor, of course. Emily had never been there. Still in her thoughts, the woman moved down the stairs, treading carefully, moving as quietly as possible. It would seem that there was no need to hide. She had done nothing of the sort. So much for going to the kitchen at night to get water. But just in case, Emily was used to blending in with the walls in the house. The safest way to live here was to keep a low profile. And just then, on a flight of stairs just between the first and first floors, the nurse heard that there was someone on the ground floor. The sounds of two voices were clearly coming to her. This was strange. The landlady didn't usually come downstairs, and the servants had long been asleep. Who could it be, and how long had it been going on? Emily realized that she might not have heard something, being inside herself, having her own internal dialogue. The people downstairs were arguing heatedly about something, though they were trying to keep it as quiet as possible. The nurse froze in panic, as if she had been caught by someone in the act of committing a crime. A completely incomprehensible and inexplicable feeling. Why all of a sudden? But inside, everything was screaming danger. The body was furiously waving a red flag. Why was this happening? Emily didn't even understand at first what the reason for such a nervous reaction was, and only then logic pulled up following the conclusion that had long since been drawn by the subconscious in the inner voice. Right? This house is all about secrets. Everyone lives in suspense. And what if the mistress found out that the servants had overheard something that should not have touched her ears? There was no doubt about it, the decision would be unequivocal. And the bystander would be thrown out in a flash. Her heart was pounding frantically. A second thought came to her: what if Emily's only fooling herself? What if it's just someone on the staff fighting? Why would she immediately think something bad? The woman, barely containing her anxiety and tremendous inner tension, froze in place and turned to listen. To be honest, she didn't care at all about the interesting conversation, which by its format resembled more of a clarification of relations. She was only interested in one thing: how not to get caught. She reasoned that whoever was there would be better off if the others remained blissfully ignorant of the fact that their conversation had a bystander. The nurse didn't want trouble with any of the residents of the house, not even the maid or the gardener. The nurse had wanted to go up to the first floor and hide in her room. Except that now it was risky. She might make an accidental noise or touch something, or trip. It's always the law of meanness when you're trying to be quieter than water. Don't make a move. It's better to wait. There wasn't much chance of being caught on the stairs. All the house staff lived on the ground floor except for her. Emily lived in the next room to the master, which was reasonable and justified. The problem could arise if the landlady herself was in the kitchen, but that was unlikely. To avoid misunderstandings and unpleasant encounters, Emily strained and listened to see where the people arguing were. It was decided if people were coming this way, then she would take her chances and start climbing up to her place. For now, she would wait. Maybe Emily's behavior wasn't the most logical. Afterwards, in hindsight, she had reasoned and thought many times about the best course of action. Only what good would it do now? A person who is in constant nervous tension, caught by surprise at night, does not always reason as logically, sensibly, and reasonably as a person in other, more typical and stable circumstances. She could blame herself all she wanted now, but what had been done couldn't be undone. Emily froze on a flight of stairs in complete darkness, listening to the voices that came to her, barely audibly concentrating on the sounds from outside. The nurse immediately recognized the woman's voice. The most frightening theory was confirmed. It was Mrs. Chloe. The male voice was unfamiliar to her, although by the emotional message and the manner of communication between the couple it was immediately clear that this man was the mysterious lover of the mistress. Damn it, she cursed to herself. Her thoughts were racing what to do now? Run or freeze with terror and panic? The carer chose the second option. She turned into a plaster statue, unable to move. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought she could hear it a few meters away. Her head rumbled and her mouth felt even more dry. She was incredibly scared to stay here and scared to run away. Worse, Now she heard bits of phrases, some details of the conversation, and a cold sweat broke through her insides. Mother dear. The poor, already terrified woman nearly had a panic attack. Emily no longer had any illusions about her landlady. In the months she'd been in the house, she'd already worked out what Mrs. Chloe really was. But there were limits. Everything has limits. You don't realize how urgent this is, she whispered, trying not to raise her voice. That old goat could die any minute. So what then? A male voice instantly parried. Don't you realize that there's no hurry? He's sick, but not insane, in case you haven't forgotten. And if he guesses, suspects something wrong, what then? Not only will he not sign a bloody thing, but can you imagine our prospects if it all comes out? Like we didn't take risks before. We don't have time for small talk in front of this old bloke now. Do you understand? Mr. Matthew could be finished at any minute. The lover was clearly angry, and he didn't even hide it. The next phrase he said with a burst, even with some aggression, though with a share of some fatigue. My God, Chloe, and what do you suggest? What do you want exactly? And the hostess apparently only waited for this. She seemed eager to share her plan. I'll try to slip him a deed of gift, she said. Among other documents, of course, to increase our chances of success, we could switch his glasses, for example. As she finished her thought, Mrs. Chloe breathed heavily, so heavily that even Emily could hear it. She was clearly waiting for the man's reaction, what he would say, how he would react. But he was in no hurry to share his opinion. A tense silence hung. It's a crude idea, but it's interesting, he finally said. It could work. But will Mr. Matthews sign the papers if he can't see the text? He would never have made such a mistake before. He would. Mr. Matthews' wife exclaimed confidently. He just needs the old man to be in the right condition, tired, exhausted. Preferably right after a shot of morphine. I know what the anesthetic does to him. It's not hard now. He's in so much pain that he gets injections several times a day. The lover replied after a short pause with some thoughtfulness in his voice. Well, yes, perhaps it could work then, but that's only a possibility. Don't forget that there is also a huge risk. He who doesn't take risks doesn't drink expensive champagne and dies poor, the woman retorted angrily. I'm not ready not to at least try. Have you seen the current will? I'll be a pauper with a pittance to my name. You're right about that. The benefits and the prospects are tempting. That's what I'm talking about. Sweetheart, shall we all go back to the bedroom? The poor nurse continued to stand motionless. What was she going to do now? The panic inside was only growing. Here now the lovers would go to their main staircase and discover her. Just awful. Stupid. But from panic and from shock, Emily couldn't decide what to do. Just stood motionless, hesitant to do anything. Like that indecisive person, afraid to make any decision at all. After a few minutes, Emily realized that the people below had left. They couldn't have come up so slowly. No, that's right. They'd just gone downstairs. Apparently into the garage to climb back up to the third floor undetected by their separate staircase. It's impossible to describe the nurse's emotions at that moment. She almost died of fear. Unable to bear the strain, Emily sank straight down onto the marble staircase. Her legs wouldn't hold up any longer. Her body seemed to have exhausted its last resources. She had a terrible urge to cry, to feel sorry for herself, for Mr. Matthew, for the injustice of the world. A lump came to her throat. It was probably at least 20 minutes before the nurse forced herself up with a willful decision. She had to at least make it to the kitchen, to finally get a drink of water. She was literally dying of thirst. Climbing down the stairs on woozy, still naughty legs, Emily drank a liter of water in a gulp. She couldn't get drunk and she couldn't catch her breath. The woman was scared as it was, but this incident of eavesdropping on a conversation was crossing all possible boundaries. There was only one question: God, what am I going to do about this now? Emily was angry with herself. She had to be in this place at this minute. Ah, with what happiness she would have remained in ignorance. Who would have known why she needed someone else's problems? And what to do with this knowledge now? Only unnecessary torment and remorse. There's no real way out. It is necessary to admit, at least to herself, she was in a hopeless situation. There's nothing she can do. Who will believe her? It's word against word. Only Mrs. Chloe's word would be more authoritative, more meaningful. And then who would believe her? A simple carer. It seemed the most sensible course of action was to just stay out of it, to forget this night's incident like a nightmare. Nothing had happened. After all, it would be better that way, and rightly so. Since that damn night, Emily had been walking around the house like a shadow. She'd been careful before not to have contact with anyone except Mr. Matthew. Not to be seen by anyone. Not now. When she heard her mistress's voice, the nurse tried to get away immediately. She was afraid that Mrs. Chloe would know from the look on her face that she was aware of it. The woman knew well enough that she was not a very good actress. Perhaps the fear was in vain, but why test fate? She tried to forget about that unfortunate, accidentally overheard conversation between lovers. To be honest, Emily wasn't doing a very good job. Her thoughts kept revolving around one topic. She kept trying to figure out how to proceed. Should she listen to her conscience or be coldly calculating? She was desperate to consult her mother. Mrs. Mia always knew how to find the right approach, the right words. But how to tell her over the phone was impossible. It's only Thursday night. There's still a lot of time before the next day off. What if Mrs. Chloe plans to do her dirty deeds before then? Or worse, in the absence of a carer? Obviously, a decision had to be made. Only Emily was having a complete paralysis of will here. An unbearably difficult choice. She wanted very much to shift the responsibility for the decision to anyone else, but not to take this huge burden on her shoulders. Emily was very angry at herself, at the fate that had put her in this position. Certainly at her lover, yes, even at Mr. Matthew. On Friday morning, out of the blue, the landlady announced to Emily, "Mr. Matthew needs a routine checkup at the clinic. Then we have business to attend to. So you're free until 5 this evening." "Are you sure you won't need me? You won't need any help?" Mrs. Chloe only gave the nurse a negative nod of her head. "Well, that's lucky. So we could go home and talk to Mum." Emily didn't know what kind of reaction Mrs. Mia was expecting. To put it bluntly, she needed the advice to put the responsibility on someone else's shoulders. Emily expected to do exactly as her mother suggested. She was sick of thinking about it herself. How tired she was of the house, the dying patient, the constant worry. And this situation, she wanted to get away from it all, to rest, to take time out. Mrs. Mia, listening to her daughter's detailed account, gasped, "Emily, I don't even know what to advise you. It's like a vicious circle. You don't even know what's the best thing to do." "I don't know either," Emily said. "I wish I could just walk out of there and never come back. But how can I leave Mr. Matthew? It would be a betrayal." "Oh, I don't know. What if you interfere? Have you thought about what it might do to you?" "Let's be reasonable and objective," Mum urged. "There's a very good chance that you'll achieve nothing but suffer in vain." The nurse listened to Mum in silence. She's right. Yes, she's absolutely right. Emily thought about it herself. "Imagine," Mrs. Mia went on, "you'll only bring a great power upon yourself, this Mrs. Chloe, also her lover. God knows who he is. You're playing blind. What's it going to come out to? Nothing good. And in that orbit, it'll be you, the kids, me. Everything could be at stake. I mean, we're talking about colossal amounts of money, aren't we?" "Mum, I know all this," Emily exclaimed. "Do you know how many times I've run every possible scenario through my head? Believe me, countless. And what's the main conclusion? I don't care about my conscience or my honor. Pardon the high-handedness. Mother." Mrs. Mia watched her only daughter's torment with bitterness. She understood her perfectly well. She understood her distress. She wanted so much to help her. The woman understood how to do it, to take the blow for herself, offering a ready-made solution. "Yes, leave it as it is," she nodded. Mr. Matthew knew perfectly well who he had married. He'd done it all on his own. No one forced him. It's not your business to save his capital now. It would cost you a lot of money. And for what? There's a good chance he'll die in blissful ignorance. You're the one who says he doesn't have long to live. Emily listened carefully to her mother and only sighed heavily. Of course, if you looked at the situation rationally, if you approached it with a cool head, of course Mum was right. Except where to put that damn conscience that was pushing her towards an emotional and stupid decision? Emily nodded and even gave Mrs. Mia her promise to stay out of other people's problems. She was having a hard time with that, a very hard time. The woman crossed her daughter in farewell and shouted, "Be good." Emily wanted to believe that she would do it, that she would keep her promise to her mother. It's over. It had to be accepted as a fait accompli. The decision had been made, and there was no turning back. But that was easy to say, but not to accept. The nurse's heart and soul were still not in the right place. It was good that things were going peacefully and quietly in the house. There was no new upheaval. I wonder if this was the calm before the storm. Whatever it was, Emily even calmed down a little. Talking to her mom had done her good, calmed her down. She sort of accepted the whole situation for what it was. On Sunday, she didn't get to go home. The old man was not well at all. She wouldn't have left him like that herself. And the landlady came round and reminded her. "Emily, you remember our condition. This is a force majeure. I can't let you go." "I understand." "Of course I'll stay with Mr. Matthew. Don't worry," Emily replied. There was a moment when the woman thought, "This is the end," but the patient's condition suddenly improved. Emily's joy was genuine. The man had become very dear to her. On Tuesday afternoon, Mrs. Chloe found the nurse in the kitchen as she ran in for a bite to eat. "Mr. Matthew needs an injection urgently," she said. "We've got things to do in half an hour," Mrs. Chloe said in a commanding tone. "There's no way we can put them off for a couple of hours. You may be excused, but be at home just in case." Emily, of course, understood at once. Today was the ex-day the lovers had agreed on. Mr. Matthew's crisis had spurred them into action. It was clear that they could not delay any longer, that it was dangerous. So it was now or never. The nurse meekly did as Mrs. Chloe demanded and retired to her room. She wanted to be away from her master's study, where the meanness would be done, to abstract herself from the situation, from the outside world. Emily even began to read a book, but realization eluded her. It was simple, her thoughts were not here. No, she couldn't do this. How could she even live with herself after this? Emily clearly realized she wouldn't be able to resist her gut, her conscience that was screaming and begging for action. She was angry at herself, at her integrity, her honesty, her integrity, and her uncompromising character. Emily stood up resolutely and walked out of the room. She headed straight for Mr. Matthew's office, where the action was now unfolding. She stopped at the door. It would be a good idea to see what was going on in there. She didn't want to burst into the office without any information. She leaned over to the keyhole, listening. As expected, 3 people were present, all the same characters: Mr. Matthew, Mrs. Chloe, and her lover. The male voice the nurse recognized at once, and it brought her back to the memory of that terrible night, overwhelmed with emotion. There was no place for them now. Emily turned to listen. How quickly it became clear the mistress's lover had been at this meeting for a reason. He was, as it turned out, also Mr. Matthew's notary. What a simple mystery. Now the lover's plan was clear. Mrs. Chloe sang in a sweet voice to her ailing husband. "Darling, but you do realize that this is a very good deal. The benefits will be enormous. You can't pass up a chance like this. It's just stupid." The old man obviously listened, as he was in a kind of prostration, which is not surprising if you remember about the recent horse dose of anesthetic. But the businessman tried not to show it. "I've read the CFO and development director's reports. Yeah, you're probably right. It's a nice piece of business. I think we're very lucky." "It's all ready to go," Mrs. Chloe said. "Michael's prepared all the documents. They just need to be signed, just like we agreed." "Well, let's sign them." The businessman exhaled heavily. This business conversation was given to him with obvious difficulty in overcoming. Emily wasn't even sure that he understood exactly what was going on. Emily was jolted by the next question Mr. Matthew asked. "Look, what's wrong with my glasses? I can't see a damn thing. I can't focus my eyes. I can't focus my eyes," the old man complained. His wife, obviously, expected this complaint and answered as casually as possible. "Everything seems to be all right, not cloudy. Would you like me to bring you a napkin to wipe them?" Emily thought that the voice of the hostess still a little trembling. Or was it just that? Characteristically, the notary, aka the mistress's lover, was silent. Cunning, not such a fool as to set himself up and raise his voice. Of course, there's no telling how things might turn out. You shouldn't, Mr. Matthew replied good-naturedly to his wife's suggestion. His eyesight must have gone completely blank. I'm not surprised at anything anymore. It's a bloody old disease. All right, Michael, you've read and checked everything carefully. I'll sign it. I'm so tired I heard the rustle of paper as the old man flipped through the documents. This was the decision point here, and now it was make up your mind or run away, throwing away all doubts. Emily flew into the patient's office in a whirlwind. She did not think to stop, hurrying to the table where the sick businessman was sitting. From surprise, the hostess at first even shrieked. Of course, her heart had probably frozen in anticipation of a huge score. And now this surprise. What's going on here? What do you think you're doing? Mrs. Chloe shouted in an angry voice. But Emily wasn't going to stop. It was not for this that she had dared so long to be timid at this shout. No, she paid no attention to her hostess or to the speechless men. Emily rushed to the table without a word. She snatched the pile of documents from Mr. Matthew's hands and with a swift movement tore them in half. Among other things, there was a deed of gift. The woman didn't doubt that for a second. It was already a silent scene. The notary, Mrs. Chloe's lover, only flapped his eyes in amazement. Apparently, he had not yet decided how to react. The already lethargic Mr. Matthew also just stared at the nurse. A mute question lingered in his eyes, what's wrong, but he remained silent, continuing to stare at her in bewilderment. Emily, meanwhile, was trying to catch her breath. Only Mrs. Chloe wouldn't stop. She was literally like a hysterical woman, shouting at the servants in a bad voice. "Girl, what do you think you're doing? What have you done, you idiot?" Mrs. Chloe obviously had many other insulting epithets. Emily did not even doubt that if you gave her a little time to analyze what had happened, a terrible hurricane would fall on her. "What is this? What do you mean?" Mr. Matthew came to life, expecting some kind of explanation. He had studied Emily well enough to know that a rational, logical explanation would follow. But what was it? "Who are you?" Wait, Michael bent his eyebrows. "Do you realize you're derailing a major deal? You're not going to get away with this." She didn't care about anyone else in the room. She was only addressing Mr. Matthew. Still clutching the two halves of the torn documents tightly, choking on her words, she tried to summarize the situation, to quickly recount the conversation she had overheard between the two lovers. She had to hurry. Now she would be interrupted, and that would be the end of it. Except that, to Emily's surprise, and the notary's, the patient's legal spouse froze with shock and surprise. It was too sudden a denouement. They probably didn't realize in their worst nightmare that someone had found out about their plans. "I understood that your will didn't leave anything to Mrs. Chloe," Emily finished as convincingly as she could. "So she slipped you a deed of gift to grab the business and property in advance." Mrs. Chloe couldn't bear it. She walked straight at Emily, glaring at her with rage boiling inside her, shouting, "Give me the papers at once. What nonsense is this, you idiot?" Except Emily had no intention of giving up. She'd been given a head start by letting her talk. Now she had to convince the patient. The old man's eyes couldn't tell who he believed. He didn't say anything out loud either. The carer went all in. "Mrs. Chloe, I won't give you back for anything. Mr. Matthew, hold this. Don't give it to them. Just a minute, please. I'll find your normal glasses with your diopters, and you'll see for yourself." It was a real battle between two women. They knew what was at stake, and they both knew they couldn't afford to lose. On hearing Emily's proposal, Mrs. Chloe tried to lunge at her, but she had already handed the papers into her master's hands. Mr. Matthew himself was stunned. The reaction of his wife, of course, he did not like, and he firmly told his wife in a threatening tone, "You can't come near me either. Don't you try it." Turning his gaze to the nurse, he turned to her. "Well, look for your glasses. If you don't think these are right for me, I'll read everything carefully, study everything, and we'll find out by experience which of you will go away with a wolf ticket." The lovers looked at each other in horror. Mrs. Chloe's mind was clearly changing from one thought to another. She was frantically trying to work out what she should do now. She must try to get out of it. There was no help from her beau. He was as white as a sheet and shaking like a leaf. Her wife decided to appeal to her emotions. "Matthew, do you really believe that wicked girl? What nonsense is this?" Mrs. Chloe even tried to laugh, but instead of ease in her voice showed a note of hysteria. "I told you we'll find out who we can trust," her husband said in a steely voice. His tone was clearly intolerant of objection. In a few minutes, Mr. Matthew was still sitting at his desk, studying the papers. With the glasses Emily had brought him, he could see every line and every letter. That in itself was proof that she was right. When he reached about the middle of the folder, the old man stopped suddenly. Mr. Matthew had obviously found what he was looking for. He looked round at the horrified and panicked audience and threw a careless glance at Emily. "Girl, call the police." Inside, Emily was jubilant she had risked it, not for nothing. Thank God Mrs. Chloe and Andrew had finally collapsed. They realized their fate was sealed. The businessman's wife didn't want to give up so easily. She tried to say something and beg her husband, but the policeman wouldn't listen to any excuses. Mr. Matthew was literally seething with rage. Apparently, the adrenaline had given him strength, and the medication had weakened him a little. The old man was steadfast and firm. All attempts of the wife to soften his fate ran into a stone wall. Even Mrs. Chloe's unsuccessful lover raised his voice. "She forced me to do it. You understand, Mr. Matthew? Mrs. Chloe forced me to commit a crime. This mean and nasty thing I didn't want to do. God knows I was against it." Only this feeble effort to get away with it was taken worse. He was now an outcast in this room, not just to two, but to three. The master looked at Michael with ill-concealed hatred. He had clearly slipped into insignificance in his eyes. All further events developed rapidly. Indeed, the police arrived, then came even an investigator from the investigative committee, a big boss. Everyone was extremely interested in what had happened, questioned, interrogated. Emily recounted the whole story 10 times, from beginning to end, answering endless questions. The end was obvious, and in fact, joyless. The mistress of the house, already a former mistress of the house, was led out of the mansion with her lover in handcuffs. Well, Emily thought to herself, she'd said she wanted to take a chance. It hadn't worked out. Emily didn't have any schadenfreude. She was just dead tired, drained like a lemon. It's amazing. Such noise and noise, such a fight had been here just a few days ago, and now everything was quiet. I couldn't believe it. The house had returned to its former rhythm of existence, although, admittedly, the servants and all the staff breathed a sigh of relief. Gone was the oppressive atmosphere of the house, along with its former mistress. After that day, the patient never spoke to Emily again about what had happened. He was understandably distressed inside. It was a betrayal, as it seemed to him, of a kindred and close person. Mr. Matthew trusted his wife wholeheartedly and was struggling to recover from what had happened. Emily remained silent. Why was her case small? The essence of her work had not changed. She didn't expect any gratitude. For her, the best reward was her conscience and the feeling that she had done the right thing, no matter what. Except that the rest of the house staff were gossiping, savoring the details of what had happened. It was understandable they were all getting a kick out of the landlady. After all, Mrs. Chloe was a secret tyrant. And here at last was the long-awaited act of retribution and justice. Nevertheless, Emily did not interfere in these conversations and avoided direct questions. She was not comfortable with the subject. She wanted to forget the past as soon as possible. More than a week passed before Mr. Matthews suddenly turned to her. "Emily, I keep wanting to ask you, why didn't you tell me all this before? Why did you wait?" She didn't want to deceive the old man. It was sinful. She confessed to him, "Honestly, I was afraid for myself, for the children, for my mom. I didn't know how it would turn out for me, so I kept quiet. I didn't think it was my business to meddle in other people's affairs." Mr. Matthews smiled slyly at her words. "But still, I couldn't get past someone else's misfortune." Emily only shrugged her shoulders. What could she say? She couldn't praise herself, because there were still horrible scenarios in front of her eyes, where everything had gone horribly wrong, where Emily was guilty of all sins. She was just lucky. And what would have happened if luck had been on the side of Mrs. Chloe and her lover? It's frightening to imagine. With the old man, they left the subject again. Both he and she were uncomfortable remembering the past in detail again. Nothing had changed in their relations. They continued their cooperation on the same terms. Emily was also just a carer for a sick and dying old man. That suited everyone. They believed in the best. Except, unfortunately, the miracle didn't happen. Mr. Matthew passed away 2.5 months after all these events. As a medical professional, Emily understood perfectly well he was still lucky. His body was still fighting and resisting the cursed disease for a long time. But as a human being, as a woman, Emily wept sincerely for Mr. Matthew at the funeral. She had managed to become attached to the old man, even to love him. It was a sincere sentiment. Despite the expectation of an imminent end, the businessman's death still knocked the nurse out. She experienced his departure as the death of a beloved relative. A fortnight after the old man's funeral, she received a phone call. It was Mr. Matthew's trusted employee, and he stunned her by telling her that the patient had left Emily half of his fortune. From confusion and surprise, she at first took the news as a silly joke. What nonsense. It can't be, but the documents confirmed the man's words. It was exactly like that. At last, the old man decided to ennoble Emily, who did not remain indifferent, who risked herself. It was a real shock. Emily was sad and happy at the same time. It was wonderful that she could now afford to take care of her children, to provide them with a decent future and education. But what a pity for the old man. Emily prayed for Mr. Matthew every night. Her sincere gratitude knew no bounds. Amazing and incredible. You never know where you will find and where you will lose. Life is an amazing thing, no matter how you spin it. The alarm clock ticked quietly in the morning darkness. I could have bought an electronic silent one, but the analog one didn't bother me. On the contrary, the dull ticking didn't irritate her, helped her sleep, and in the morning it made her listen, dispelled her sleep. Jessica opened her eyes, glanced at the alarm clock. As always, she'd woken up 10 minutes before it rang. Now she would lie there for those 10 minutes, occasionally looking to see how much time was left. No need to get up, she'd wake up anyway. But no, there was no signal. Apparently, the brain only turns on cue. A reflex developed over the years. One day, Jessica set her alarm clock 10 minutes ahead. For 2 days, she woke up on the alarm clock and then again lay down, watching the red second hand jumping, and waited for the call. Some kind of time machine, not an alarm clock. Jessica was the kind of woman that age adds beauty and confidence to. In her 20s, she was just a cute, pretty, a little simple-minded student who was being chased by all her classmates. And now, by the age of 40, she was a beautiful, stylish, pedigreed, intelligent beauty. Her self-confidence attracted men, but no one dared to come close. Too good. She was not a haughty bitch, just behind her as if she was dragging a trail of prosperous family life. In fact, it had been that way until recently. Jessica lay there waiting for the alarm clock to ring. Even anxious thoughts slipped in, but they were not formulated. There was no signal yet. The alarm clock erupted, nasty and inescapable. Jessica turned it off without pity. But the start was given with doubt and suspicion. Jessica suspected her husband, doubted her happy married life. She married almost 15 years ago to a promising, aspiring businessman. At that time, Michael had a car service, and now there is a whole network. She had already graduated from college and taught at the Olympic Reserve School for several years. Promising athletes were brought here from all over the state who had already made a name for themselves at regional and national competitions. Among her students were candidates for Master of Sports, winners of championships. But athletic victories are one thing, but education is another. Jessica taught English, which athletes with their terrible training regimen did not need. So Jessica's main task was to somehow buy lessons, tutoring, but to pull the hope of American sports at least for a 3. One Friday night after work, Jessica and her friend in misfortune, Emily, a math major, decided to relax at a night. Why? Young, unmarried, tired of titled, but completely uninterested students. They have a right. They quickly regretted coming. Too loud, too bright. Tired of dancing and shouting and trying to say something, she shoved herself into a far corner, but there was a rumble of noise, and the ubiquitous twirling spotlights were in her eyes. Emily jumped up in front of the table. "Don't sit there." We finally got out. She couldn't wait to rush back into the thick of the dance floor. Let's go. I've met so many guys." "Cool. Come on, I can't decide who to go with." "Emily, can you do this without me?" "I think I'll go home. I'm tired." "What are you talking about?" "What about home? We'll go somewhere else." "Don't go now." Emily, dancing, walked back into the teeming crowd. Jessica wasn't going to wait for her. Clearly, Emily wasn't raring to go home, and there was no stopping her now. In her short dress and high heels, she was just starting to cut loose. Tonight she was the queen of this club, and no force could make her stop now. Let her have her fun. It wasn't often they got such a break from it. Jessica waited for the music to quiet down so she could make her way to the exit through the dancing crowd. "Hi." A tall young man stood in front of the table. "Can I sit down? Emily has set the pace so fast and I can't take much more." "Yeah, sit down. I'm just leaving anyway. Can I come with you?" "I want some quiet and fresh air. Let's take a little walk." "Can I walk with you?" That's how Jessica met Michael, her future husband. Nice guy, good manners, nice family, beautiful and properly groomed. Was there love? Of course there was. But somehow, it wasn't intense.
At 17, you can run to the ends of the earth for your beloved in a frenzy of passion. At 25, you need to build a reliable, happy family based on love. And all my girlfriends are already married with children. They said, "Choose Jessica. Men like you won't be pecking at you anytime soon. They'll find younger ones. Take it as it comes." It was a marriage of convenience. But it wasn't about money and wealth. It was about living happily ever after.
Now in 40 years, more and more often flashed the thought that the calculation was wrong. Maybe it was necessary to wait for a mad and unearthly love, and even for a short time, but to see the sky in diamonds, and not to live 15 years of calm, prosperous, and happy life, which now flew to all hells. They didn't have children. It didn't work out. Jessica sometimes thought that if they'd had kids, things would have turned out differently. They didn't really want kids. At least Jessica didn't feel bad about it. It would have been nice to have a baby, but no, it wasn't. She never understood the enthusiasm of her friends who grabbed other people's children in their arms and hooted with them. I never felt any emotion at the sight of babies. She must be some kind of a defective. She doesn't like other people's children. If she loved her own, she wouldn't know. They don't exist. 2 months ago, Jessica felt that in their family, as in the Danish kingdom, something was wrong. Everything seemed to be the same as always, but there was some kind of reticence. Like Michael had a secret. What secret? They never hid anything from each other. He looked at Jessica with a frozen stare, like he couldn't see. Sometimes he seemed to want to say something, but it was as if he hadn't decided if he should. He always worked hard, and if he was late, it never occurred to Jessica to get jealous and throw tantrums. Now she was watching the clock, calculating what time he should be home. If he wasn't home on time, she'd start to worry, to suspect. Of what? Well, what could one suspect a husband of? Cheating, I guess. Although it seemed to Jessica that a cheating husband should behave differently. She didn't know how. But for some reason, she didn't believe in cheating. It was too trivial. There was no other reason for the changed relationship. "Michael, what time are you coming over?" "I don't know. It's a lot of work. You're hardly ever home. You don't tell me anything. It's like I'm not in your life." "Jess, are you jealous of me?" "It's a little late for that. I understand about 15 years ago. But why now?" "I thought you know what to do when you're imagining things." "Okay, I'm off. Smoochie." He poked Jessica on the cheek, grabbed his keys, and left. That's how we talked. Maybe it was nothing. I made it up. I'm suffering. But a nagging sense of impending misery lingered. No, something's wrong. Something's about to happen. Jessica decided to do something useful, but not her favorite. She had her own system for keeping the house in order. Sure, dusting and scrubbing the floors was a necessity, but she hated general cleaning, never trying to do everything at once. She assigned herself half an hour of family chores. There are community chores, and these are family chores. For example, wash the window, dust the bookcase, put the kitchen shelves in order. It's not a waste of half an hour. And the things I didn't want to do are done. Today it was the clothes closet's turn. It was high time to put away the winter stuff, make an inspection of t-shirts and shirts. There's probably something that needs to be thrown out by now. Well, not thrown out, but taken to the country house. They don't throw anything away. First, they take it to the country house, and then, when it's been there for 2 years, it goes straight to the trash. If you have a summer house, there are no trash cans at home. Going through her shirts, Jessica fumbled with something hard in her breast pocket, a photograph. The photo was of Michael and some woman. Jessica had seen this woman somewhere, only she looked different. She remembered old photos of Michael from his college days showed this woman, but much younger. Jessica hadn't really looked at her husband's old photos, but I think this was the girl she'd seen. She'd have to check. The old albums were stored in the back row of the bookcase. Jessica took out a row of books and pulled out the albums. Spreading the albums out on the table, she looked for a picture she honestly didn't remember very well. Okay, something vague like she'd seen. Jessica didn't even really understand why she was doing this. Well, she'd find a picture of a girl, so what? Only that Michael had met somewhere either a classmate or a classmate and had taken a picture with her, but she kept looking for the picture. She thought she'd find it and learn something very important. She did find it. Here is this girl, beautiful with a bold look with some irrepressible energy which is visible even in the old photo. And next to Michael, look so that it is clear, is not just love. Here is a passion that will sweep away everything in its path, push on any deeds. Something happened there in the distant past, and now it will auction in the prosperous life of Jessica. She didn't just feel it. She knew it for a fact. The doorbell rang. Emily came in. Over the years, Emily had managed to get married twice and have 2 children, gain weight, lose weight, gain weight again, but remain her closest friend. Oh, what's this? Nostalgia. What are you doing in the old stuff? You know, it's just a weird picture. Look, here's Michael and his girlfriend, and here's them, but a long time ago. So what? Maybe this one was taken a long time ago too. It doesn't look like it, judging by the age. It's done since a year ago, and the shirt he's wearing is the one I bought. So this girl showed up again not too long ago. He never told me anything about her. He kept the picture in his pocket. Either it was precious or he was afraid he'd lose it. Or he was afraid I'd see it. Jess, what does that mean? Anything. There's a lot of possibilities. Putting aside the most unpleasant one, the mistress, for example, he met an old love. Well, they took a photo for a good memory, slipped the photo in his pocket and forgot. Inga seems to be trying to calm and cheer up Jessica, offering different options to explain the situation with the photo. And now you can't find a place for yourself and draw horrible pictures of infidelity. By the way, that's also an option. That's exactly how it was planned. I decided to freshen things up, so I planted this picture on you. I wish I had your optimism. What's there to be sad about? It's a tragedy. Even if it's a mistress, it's no big deal. No, you can't forgive, of course. Remember how I kicked my first one out with a kick in the ass? But I didn't forgive him. I hate picking up scraps for someone else. Isn't that cheap? I divorced one idiot, found another. Jessica is at a loss to ask her friend for advice on what she should do now. Emily suggests asking Michael directly who the girl in the photo is. But Jessica doubts her husband will tell the truth since he's been silent and acting strangely so far. She feels things are complicated with this girl from the past. Emily insists that they need to find out the truth, even if bitter, rather than hiding their head in the sand. This leads Jessica to the idea of following her husband, although she realizes that it is ugly and dishonest. But if it's impossible to live any other way, then decency will have to be compromised. Jessica still tried to avoid being followed and asked Michael directly about the girl in the old photo. He seemed to remember that it was a certain Sasha with whom he studied together. But after showing the recent photo, Jessica is waiting for an explanation as to why he was recently dating her and carrying the photo in his pocket. The conversation doesn't seem to have cleared things up yet, and Jessica has to decide if it's really worth following her husband to find out the truth. The issue of trust in their relationship hangs in the air. Well, met by chance. Recognized him. Not in the old photo. Then why did you keep her picture? Jess, I'm sorry, yeah, I know this girl. We had a relationship a long time ago, but that was way before your time. There's nothing to do with us now. Me. How long ago? What's with the interrogation? I don't want to talk like that. I can go out with old friends. I don't have to ask your permission. Sure, honey. Jessica was sitting in her car outside her husband's office, waiting for something. So he'd get out, so he'd drive. He's got a bunch of auto body shops around town. There's no telling where he'd go. I felt like a fool, but I wouldn't leave. Empty at my mind. I had to follow through. Michael came out, got in the car. Okay, let's go. We drove a short distance and stopped at a coffee shop. Michael went into the cafe. Jessica got out of the car and through the glass tried to see who he came to see. There was no one. He was sitting alone at a table. Jessica cursed herself and got ready to leave. And then she saw her, the girl in the picture. She came into the cafe, sat at Michael's table. Judging by the expression on her face and the abrupt gestures, she said something unpleasant to him. Jessica didn't hear the words, but it seemed to her that Michael was trying to explain something. Maybe to persuade or talk him out of something, but the girl cut him off abruptly. No, not lovers. That's not how lovers behave. What kind of secret is it that you can't tell your wife? The girl left the cafe. Jessica followed her. Why? Something had to be done. She saw her go into the driveway and she drove home. She decided she was going to talk to her husband today. No more secrets, no more innuendo. She had to get it all out in the open. Family's falling apart. There's no room for sentimentality. I used to have a relationship with this woman. Okay, who didn't have a relationship before marriage? What's your connection now? Why is she showing up now? What does she want from you? All the questions had been formulated and asked, but there was no one to answer them. Michael didn't come home. This had never happened before in their entire married life. Michael had never spent the night out of the house. Jessica was used to falling asleep before her husband arrived, but he was always there in the morning. It was unusual, but she didn't feel any anxiety. She called, no answer. Did you call work? No. They hadn't seen him yet. That's when it started to get unsettling. She called all her friends and acquaintances. No, he didn't spend the night at anyone's house. So where did he sleep over? The one in the picture. Hey, Jess, did you call the police? Emily, what am I supposed to do? My husband's run away. Find him and bring him back. You think he ran away? I don't think so. I think there's trouble. We have to look for your husband who's been running away. Go to the police. The police didn't take a report. Well, come back in 3 days. He's out on a bender. You're going straight to the police? Jessica tried to explain that her husband does not go out, always sleeps at home. And if he's missing, it means he's in trouble. She must have been too emotional because the policeman behind the glass suddenly said, I understand your husband. I'd run away from such a wife above the Arctic Circle. Come back in 3 days. Goodbye. 3 days to do nothing, then file a report, then wait for someone to do something. What about Michael? Where is he? What happened to him suddenly doesn't matter. Did he cheat? Did he not cheat? What are his terrible secrets? Michael couldn't leave or run away. He was in trouble. There's no other explanation, and no one's going to find out what happened, so I'd have to do it myself. Jessica had no idea how to do that. The only thing that came to mind was to go to Samantha's house. Jessica remembered the house she lived in. Jessica didn't think Michael could be there, but Samantha would explain what their secrets were. Maybe there was at least a clue as to where he was. There was a girl sitting on a bench in the driveway, rocking a baby in a stroller. Hello. Do you know this woman? Jessica showed me a picture of Samantha. I can't say I do, but I've seen her. Jessica thanked the girl and called Samantha's apartment. No answer. She called again, but no one was there. Another girl came out of the driveway. She lives alone, has a daughter about 10 years old. They live together. Have you seen this man? Jessica showed a picture of Michael. I don't think so. There was a man who came to see her, but not this one. He came by today looking for her too. I live on the first floor. I can see the entrance from the kitchen. So I saw her yesterday. She went out with her daughter and I don't think she came back. Jessica went home, didn't find out anything, no idea what to do next. She dialed Michael again. No answer. There's another girl, 10 years old. If she was 15, I'd think she was Michael's daughter. Then it would make sense what Michael and his ex-lover have in common. But it doesn't make any sense at all. They can't have a 10-year-old daughter in common. There was hope that Michael had come home. But no, he hadn't. Jessica wandered around the empty apartment, then begged for him to come back, then cursed him for doing this to her. That night, her neighbor at the cottage called. Hey, Jess, did you have someone staying at the cottage? No. What's wrong, Aunt Maggie? I saw your lights on. I saw them. Michael came by, but he left almost immediately. Are you sure there's someone in the house? I figured if Michael brought it over, it must be someone he knows. Maybe we should go look. Aunt Maggie, please go and call me back right away. Thank God he's alive. Who did he bring in there? Samantha, I guess. But where the hell did he go? He never came home. And why would Samantha hide out at their summer house? So many questions, no one to answer them. The neighbor called Banks. No, Jess, there's a girl there. She wouldn't open the door, but she said she came with her mom. And now her mom's gone for a little while. Right now, should we call the police? No. Maggie, I think I know who the girl is. I'll be there in the morning. As Jessica drove to the cottage, she couldn't decide how to act. She sees Samantha. And what? Do I ask her outright mistress? And if she was, what would she do? Jessica didn't plan to grab her hair and wrestle her husband back with her fists, nor did she want to leave with her head held high, pretend she'd come by accident. Sure, the husband brought his mistress, and the wife just happened to be passing by. It's like the dumbest joke ever. Okay, I can't think of anything good to say anyway, so we have to act according to the situation. After all, I don't care about Samantha. I need to make sure Michael is okay, Jessica thought. She got out of the car and peered over the fence. The fence was low and not solid. The whole lot was in plain sight. There was a girl sitting at a table under an apple tree. Her blonde hair was in a ponytail, her jeans were a little too big, and she was wearing a plaid shirt. Jessica opened the gate and walked toward the girl. The girl looked up with bright eyes. No fright. Hello. Who are you? I never talk to strangers. Wow. You must have read Hemingway at such a young age. That's a good point. My name is Jessica. This is my cottage, so you're my guest. What's your name? Mary. Mary, are you here all alone? Oh, I'm here with my mom, but she went away for a while yesterday. She's not back yet. Mary, have you seen this man? Jessica showed me a picture of Michael. Of course, that's Uncle Michael. He brought us here, and he came again yesterday. Mom left with him, not hungry. No, the fridge is full. Jessica went inside, looked in the fridge. It was full. Sausage, cheese, yogurt, eggs, vegetables. There's chicken in the freezer. Settled in pretty good. They must have been planning on living here. So where's Samantha gone? We can't leave her here alone, can we? Mary, come with me, and we'll leave a note for Mom. May Schulzen. Let's go, in case Mom doesn't come home tonight. It's scary out here at night. On the way into town, Jessica asked, Mary, where's your daddy? He doesn't live with us. He is a traveler, recently was in Antarctica, and used to work in the circus. He's a magician. Jessica thought the girl chuckled. I see. He traveled to Antarctica and shows tricks to the penguins there. Mary also said that she and her mom often move around. They don't have their own house, but it's even more interesting that way. They lived in Greece for 2 years. Mary liked it there. It was warm and there was a sea, but her mom said she had to go back. So they came. Mom has a friend in town, Josh. Mary remembers where he lives. We should find him. See if he knows where Mom went. Mary, when you went to the cabin, did Mom and Uncle Michael talk about anything? Mom kept saying she was going to go all the way, punish some creep. And Uncle Michael said it was dangerous and we should leave. Well, that's just what I need. Oh, you're in trouble, Michael. What have you done? We're going to have to look for Josh Doe. Maybe he'll clear things up, Jessica thought. Mary showed her the house where Josh lived and said he would be here soon. He always came at the same time. About 10 minutes later, Mary jumped out of the car and, with a shout of Josh, threw herself around the neck of a tall, long-haired young man. Mary, my little monkey, where did you go? Where's Samantha? I haven't been able to find you for 2 days. He doesn't seem to know much either. But we have to try, Jessica decided. I'm Jessica. You see, your Samantha didn't go missing alone, but with my husband. And I found Mary at my cottage. I was hoping you could help me figure it out. You know, I'm having such a crazy day today. I drove home with one thing on my mind, something to eat. There's a diner around the corner. Let's sit down, eat, and try to exchange information. Josh knew Samantha before she went to Greece. Knew she was from Atlanta, was Miss Atlanta. Had a mother there, classmates. She didn't go on to college, got married, had a daughter, then divorced. But it was her ex-husband she had a very complicated relationship with. Josh didn't know exactly, but it seemed to him that her ex-husband had hurt Samantha in some way. She hadn't said much about him, nothing specific, but there was a clear hatred mixed with squeamishness. I'd crushed the filthy insect, but I'm disgusted. She'd gone to Greece because she'd been asked to marry there. But the marriage didn't work out, so she came back. It was after she came back that she started acting strange. She was always calling someone, disappearing, throwing jobs at Josh, meeting someone. Josh was happy to help, but he didn't understand how. It's not like she'd let him in on her plans. And now she's missing. And not alone, mind you. I don't understand what my husband has to do with this. We knew each other years ago, but I never heard from her, Jessica said. She's back, and Michael rushed to help her. He was so eager to help her that he forgot to tell me he was leaving. Is she such a femme fatale that men lose their heads and don't remember themselves? You'd lay down your head if she asked you to? No, Jessica, you're thinking in the wrong direction. There's no reason to be jealous. First of all, she has a policy of no relationships with exes. Never go back in the same river. Secondly, I think she loved her Greek. I don't know what happened between them, but she didn't come back the same. If she found your husband after all these years, she must need him for something. She can't do it without him. I wish I knew what she was up to. Anyway, couldn't she have gone back to Austin to see her mom? Or even if she did, she wouldn't have left Mary. She wouldn't even think about her mom. Okay, we can't think of anything now. I'm gonna go home, see if I can find out where she lived, who her husband was. Yeah, I'm a lousy friend. It never occurred to me to ask. Well, can you find out? Me. Yeah, I can. Jessica picked up Mary and went home. Interacting with a stranger's child turned out to be quite pleasant. The girl was well-mannered, sociable, well-read, had her own opinion, but all expressed it, sometimes very original. Jessie. For some reason, she immediately began to call Jessica. So, without any aunt, do you have children? No. That's what I'm thinking. You have kids, they grow up. You'll find out you shouldn't have had them. You don't know what you're going to have. That's a very radical decision for a 10-year-old girl. A whole philosophy based on some thoughts, on something seen and heard. It sounds strange coming from the mouth of a child, Jessica thought. But otherwise, Mary was a normal and pleasantly not at all capricious child. In the morning, Josh called. No, Jessica, I found out something. I gotta go to Austin. I'm leaving tonight. I'll be there tomorrow. I'll ask around, and then I'll be back. Will you keep an eye on Mary? Sure. What'd you find out? I'm guessing. I'll tell you when I get back. Josh arrived in Austin, and the first thing he did was visit Samantha's mother. Old shabby house with an entryway that looked more like a public restroom. The doors are peeling, the door lock falling out of the door. It's unclear how the door even closes. The bell hanging from the wires certainly doesn't work. It's impossible to imagine Samantha living here. Could anyone really live here at all? Josh knocked on the door, not expecting an answer. Suddenly, the door opened. A woman stood in the doorway. Her age wasn't even roughly determinable. The apartment smelled so bad, it made me want to run away. You can't breathe that air. Asking about Samantha here was pointless, but Josh did ask. Samantha's a bitch. I don't think I've ever seen her before. She left my mom. I don't need my mother. I'm dying here all alone. Or do you even know she's got a daughter growing up? I don't want to know. She's an asshole herself, and her daughter will be the same. She's all grown up now. She's running around with dogs. What? Somebody come looking for Samantha? I did. I told them to get out. She said she'd laid her life on them, and now there's no one to serve her. Free and slip. She remembered the glass, but not the water, Josh muttered. The woman staggered, but held onto the door. Careful not to fall. She turned and staggered back into the apartment. Josh closed the door, pushing hard so it wouldn't open, and ran out of the entryway to get a breath of air. Okay, we talked. What a nightmare, he thought, not expecting this. One thing was certain. Samantha would never come back here. Josh's spirits were low after talking to Samantha's mother. She wasn't in Austin. That much was obvious. No one to come back to. But now that he was here, he had to ask around. See if any secrets from the past came out. Went to Samantha's high school. Her homeroom teacher was there. She had no one to talk to but her students. So she gladly told the nice young man about her former. She was a good girl with talent. It's a pity what happened. She went to a beauty contest for some reason. That's when everything started to fall apart. But she was a pretty girl, so why not be a beauty queen? You saw her mother. She's not just a queen, she'd go straight to the bar just to get out of the house. Lena said that after the beauty contest, Samantha was hit on by some daddy from the sponsors, 20 years older than her. She left with him. What happened next? Lena didn't know. Samantha never came to Austin again. You know, her friend Laura lives here. They'd been in touch somehow. Laura said Samantha called her. Maybe she knows something. The teacher suggested. Nothing concrete again, Josh thought. Although he had already guessed which sponsor he was talking about. He'd learned that Samantha had left Austin with one Michael Lawrence, who was organizing the beauty pageant. He might be Mary's father. Now we have to find Lawrence. But first, we need to talk to Laura, Josh decided. Laura worked at the local hospital. Josh went there. At first, Laura didn't want to talk. She didn't know who this man was or if he might hurt her friend. But Josh turned on all his charm, pressed the fact that Samantha was in danger, and still persuaded his faithful friend. Laura said that after the beauty contest, Samantha was going to leave with Lawrence. Anna was horrified. "You're going to live with that asshole. He's old, he's ugly, he's got greasy eyes. What am I supposed to do? Stay with my mom? Get away from her and live on your own. But Lawrence is worse than your mother. He'll ruin your life, get you into this shit. Age. No, then no. You don't talk." Laura didn't know anything more about Lawrence, but she could feel it, see it. A collector of pretty young fools. Samantha was just another miss to him. But for Samantha, Lawrence was a pass to a new life, and she had spit on everything and left. Laura's surprise was unprecedented when Samantha announced that they were married. Family life had become a dictatorship. You couldn't take a step aside. Endless humiliation, beatings, and total control. How did Samantha manage to have an affair with Michael? It's a mystery, Josh pondered. Michael didn't know that Samantha was married. He fell in love and didn't understand why his beloved would disappear for days at a time, unwilling to move in with him. So mysterious, with a lot of secrets. Lawrence solved all the mysteries quickly. When Samantha said she wanted to leave Lawrence, he didn't object. "If you want to go, go, but go where I tell you to go," and locked Samantha up in a mental institution for 2 years. After leaving the asylum, Samantha took a long time to regain consciousness, and when she woke up, she realized she was pregnant. She gave birth to Mary. She didn't care about her life for a long time, but she couldn't imagine her daughter living with this monster. Samantha filed for divorce, grabbed Mary, and ran away. Either Lawrence wasn't omnipotent or he was fed up with his stroppy wife, but they got the divorce. Samantha was afraid that Lawrence would not leave them alone, so she kept moving, calling Laura from different parts of the country. Finally, 3 years ago, she announced that she had found her happiness, fell in love, was going abroad, and that Lawrence would not bother her there. Sometimes she called, even by video link. Laura could hear Samantha sparkling with happiness and was genuinely happy for her friend, and then she called hysterically, screaming, "I'm going to kill that bastard once and for all. He will answer for everything." I did not really understand, but it seems that Lawrence sent her lover photos of beaten Samantha in the asylum and wrote that he was going to marry a vicious woman. And in the photos where Samantha was drugged, with a glazed look, she really looked terrible. Apparently, Heracles, the Greek believed, was afraid to connect fate with such a person or was not so much in love. Anyway, Samantha had to grab her daughter again and leave. That's all I know. I haven't called again, and thank you, Laura. That clears things up. If he shows up, give me a call. Josh called Jessica, said he couldn't find out anything more in Austin. And he'll be home tomorrow morning. No, Josh, you're coming straight to my place. You'll tell me everything. But if you feed me breakfast, I'll come straight to you from the train. In the morning, Jessica was awakened by the doorbell. Woke her up at the moment when she was dreaming of something nasty and disturbing. She had no strength to wake up and open her eyes. It's a good thing they woke her up. It must be Josh, Jessica thought, but it was Ingrid. Aren't you answering your phone? Michael's here? No, she came in like a hurricane. Her energy hadn't diminished over the years. Emotions are running high. Don't yell, the baby's sleeping. What baby? Where did you get a baby? Let's go to the kitchen. Have some coffee and I'll tell you all about it. I've got breakfast to make. Josh will be here in a minute. He eats so much, I'm afraid I can't feed him. Jessica could hardly contain her laughter. Ingrid's amazed face was so funny. I'm sorry, and I'll just get you a coffee. I didn't have time to go to the store. A man needs to be fed. No offense, girlfriend. Jessica couldn't take it anymore and laughed. Come on, I'll find you a sandwich, too. Before Josh arrived, Jessica had just enough time to tell him where the girl and the man had come from. Ingrid Ute and Heidi. Jessica thought she was more interested in who Josh was than anything else in the story. You're not getting married for the 3rd time, are you? Looking for a candidate. She joked. Josh arrived, tired, hungry, upset. Everything I'd learned didn't help me figure out where Samantha and Michael were, Josh summarized. Knowing Samantha's character, I fear that she's decided to take revenge on Lawrence. Self-hatred and fear for her daughter might have pushed her to rash actions. It's too expensive to compete with Lawrence, Ingrid said. He's in the upper echelon of show business. Rich, famous, surrounded by stars and the right people. Invulnerable and all-powerful. You can't get to him. And if you do, it's a head-scratcher. Ex-wife is not the kind of character he'd feel sorry for. He'll either kill her or put her away. What happens to Mary then? It's interesting that everyone's worried about Samantha and Mary. Does anyone wonder what will happen to Michael? Jessica grinned bitterly. No one cares. It's his own fault, I see. I shouldn't have gotten involved in someone else's story. But if I did, I'd like to see him get out of it unscathed. At least alive, Jessica didn't know how to deal with her husband when he came back. Or rather, if he did. What kind of love was so abnormal if after all these years he spits on our prosperous family life and gets involved in some adventure? Samantha may not be going into the same river. Michael, on the other hand, seems to be hoping for something. There's no other explanation, she thought bitterly. Does he intend to go back to Jessica? If so, how? Will he come and, without explaining or telling her anything, go on with his normal life as if nothing had happened? Does he think he can do that? Ingrid wondered. Jessica didn't know if she wanted her husband back. The only thing she wanted now was for him to be alive. We'll see. Our detective work has reached a dead end, Josh stated. Samantha's secrets are solved. Michael has no secrets. Where do we go from here? Josh felt that the only way forward was to dig into Lawrence's life. If something unforeseen, unpleasant for him, had happened in the last few days, it was likely that our vigilantes had sprung into action as soon as possible. They must be stopped before the trouble happens. I'm going to go home now, get some sleep, and find out what Lawrence is up to, what's going on. Josh, who are you? If you can find out what the powerful are up to. Ingrid was clearly interested in the young man. I'm not a big bird myself, Josh answered modestly. But I have a few friends, including some from the world of show business who I think may be aware of Lawrence's affairs. If I hear anything, I'll call you, Josh added. Don't hurt Mary. She's a good girl. Josh left, and Jessica and Ingrid were left to ponder what kind of revenge Samantha had planned, but trying it on for size. What would you do if your husband ruined your life? Ingrid asked. Well, I'd probably do nothing. I'd try to forget it like a bad dream, replied Jessica, and I'd definitely take revenge. How can you send your current wife a photo of you with your mistress? You can put your story in the press, ruin your image. But it's all kind of petty, toothless, Ingrid sighed. She didn't have the imagination for anything else. Jessica enjoyed spending the day with Mary. They went to the mall and bought Mary some clothes. She didn't even have any pajamas and only one shirt. They went to a cafe, had ice cream, then bought groceries and went home to make lunch or dinner. Josh was supposed to be here with news. And Ingrid, of course, would not stay home. While cooking dinner and talking to Mary, Jessica couldn't get the thought of her husband out of her head. Angry, of course, but even angrier at the unknown Samantha. Revenge on an ex-husband is probably fair, but why bring my Michael into it? She thought bitterly. But how can you not think about how your gamble will turn out for other people? For Michael and Jessica. Josh and friend Laura see Samantha as an innocent victim, hurt and humiliated. Jessica didn't see it that way. She developed a very different image of herself over the days. Bold, bossy, unforgiving of insults and insults, willing to go to extremes. Surely there was something to avenge Lawrence. But Jessica also questioned the extent of his guilt. The ease with which Samantha had put other people's lives on the line, including her own daughters, was astonishing. In the evening, they gathered the council, and Josh laid out what they'd learned. Lawrence was really getting into trouble. A seemingly small thing at first. His young wife, an aspiring singer whom no one had heard yet, had been sent a photo of her husband having fun with his mistress. The mistress is even younger and, apparently, even more eager to become a star. Otherwise cannot explain the popularity of the old worldly daddy of young girls. But the young wife turned out to be wise beyond her years. She didn't want Lawrence's love. She didn't marry for that until he made a singer out of her. No divorce is out of the question. She didn't notice the affair, and there was no scandal. If Samantha did it, the first blow missed. The second one was much more serious. Lawrence's production center was churning out stars like pies. Not a year without a star. If they're making stars, somebody wants them. It was needed by sponsors who invested a lot of money and wanted a lot of money in return. Their indignation was not limited when they learned that most of the money Lawrence spends not on the promotion of stars, but on himself, his favorite. These were not empty words. They were presented with documents and proof of how much and on what was spent. The production center was cracking at the seams. Sponsors demanded Lawrence return the money, and the underachieving stars realized that fame was passing them by. Apparently, Samantha had been preparing this blow for a long time and disappeared when she was ready to deliver it. Realized that the collapse of Lawrence's career will not forgive her. Oh my God, what was she hoping for? That Lawrence would bitch and not find out who started? Now Jessica was horrified. But the worst part was that Michael would be the one to retaliate. She no longer doubted that he was involved. It was unlikely he was helping Samantha get information not his level, but he was hiding it from Lawrence. That was a fact. No, Jess, don't panic. Josh saw that Jessica was on the verge of a breakdown. We're not even sure what Samantha did. Somewhere she must have gotten those documents, and her entourage. I haven't found any people working at the Lawrence Center, although I don't know much about her at all, Josh added. Ingrid entered the room with a cup of coffee. Jess, do you have anything stronger? Coffee's a little hard to get through in here. She must have realized that Lawrence was going to retaliate now. Did she really think she'd spend the rest of her life in hiding? I don't see what she stands to gain by raising Lawrence to the ground now. On the contrary, he is now her personal enemy, Ingrid wondered. Was revenge so much in her eyes that she did not think of Mary? I don't understand why she didn't think of her daughter either. Josh seemed to doubt Samantha's infallibility. Let's have a drink. Jessica put the cognac on the table. Explain to me what to do. My husband is missing, by the way. It's been 3 days, but there's no point in going to the police. As it turned out, he's not missing, but ran away with some inadequate girl involved in some strange affairs. So what do I do? Everyone sat silent, drinking, thinking. Ingrid thought it was necessary to wait for Michael's return. He'll be back someday. He'll explain everything. Josh wanted to find Samantha's informants to see where she got her information. How much truth there was out there. Lawrence will lie low now, but he'll surface later. Sooner rather than later. Good things like this don't sink. We need to understand the extent of the damage and assess how angry he is. What kind of retaliation might be necessary? Jessica had her own plan. To meet with Lawrence and get his opinion of Samantha, his assessment of all the events. She suspected that Lawrence had a completely different perspective on what had happened. Jessica summarized. It was agreed. Ingrid would stay home and look after Mary. What if Michael showed up? Josh finds out how badly Lawrence was hurt and what the threat to Samantha is. Jessica makes direct contact with Lawrence and tries to find out what he thinks about Samantha and recent events. Truthfully, how to get close to the producer, she didn't know. He's not likely to open up about his personal life to the first woman he meets. No, why don't you pretend to be a journalist? Josh suggested it. That would be the worst. He's as scared as hell of journalists these days, Ingrid objected. Maybe you're Samantha's lawyer and you want to settle before the trial. Josh came up with an idea. First of all, no one was suing. Second, having a lawyer is practically an admission of guilt, and we're not sure that it was Samantha who attacked Lawrence, Jessica countered. He's got plenty of well-wishers without her. Maybe he's not even thinking about her and will hand him the guilty party on a silver platter. Then he'll be all over her, Ingrid concluded, unable to think of anything. Jessica drove to the Lawrence Center. The main thing is to see him, and the rest will follow, she decided. As expected, she couldn't get past the guards. Not surprisingly, in light of recent events, Mr. Lawrence doesn't see anyone. No new projects, no appointments either. So barricaded. It's impossible to get through. Okay, let's go the other way, Jessica thought. She knew what Lawrence looked like. The media personality scandal was all over the TV channels. Is he going to come out of the center someday? Clearly, they won't let him near me. I have to think of a way to get his attention, to say something, so that Lawrence will realize it's in his best interest to talk to me. She sat on the bench in front of the office, fretting, trying to think of the right phrase to get Lawrence's attention. She had several options. But when Lawrence appeared in the doorway, she was suddenly confused, and everything she'd thought of went out of her head. He was walking toward the car, and now he would get in and drive away. She had to say something. Jessica rushed to the car and shouted, "Lawrence, tell me about Samantha. She's going to ruin my husband." The guards rushed toward her, but Lawrence suddenly stopped them. He looked at Jessica carefully and waved his hand, beckoning her over. When she approached, he asked, Do you know Samantha? No, I've never seen her. What does this have to do with my husband? He left with her. Why don't you get in the car and we'll talk? Don't worry, I don't eat beautiful women for lunch. Jessica knew her value and had long ago realized how it worked on men. But now a chill ran down her spine. She felt scared and a little creepy. She was scared, but she couldn't back down, so she got into the car. May, take it easy. After all, I'm not the one who came to see you. You're the one who wants something from me, Lawrence said. I want to know about Samantha. I know her version of events from her friend's words, but I don't believe it too much. I want to understand what my husband's gotten himself into. Now, I want to hear your side of the story. What's your husband's name? Michael. Me. Where is he now? That's what I'm trying to find out. I'm truly sorry if your husband got involved with Samantha. Nothing good can come of it for you or him. Guns approached the driver. No, Walter, the girl and I are having a serious conversation. Not the car version. Let's go to the restaurant. What's your name, really? What's ours? And, Jessica. You know, Jessica, I probably should have told you this a long time ago. I didn't want to be a pain in the ass. I'll tell you, I feel sorry for you and for myself. I'm tired of being the bad guy. Believe it or not, it's up to you. But maybe confessing to a villain will help you. For some reason, I want to help you. I didn't expect myself to be so sentimental. I hope I won't regret it. And I hope I don't have to tell you it's not for the press. At the restaurant, Lawrence was greeted like a regular. Me. Here's your table, as usual. Or Jessica, would you like anything? No, I'm not here to eat. Go ahead. Lawrence's version was radically different from what Jessica had heard. The only thing they had in common was that they met in Austin at a beauty pageant. Samantha immediately figured out on whom the title of queen depends and did everything to get this title. She was not embarrassed by the age of the prince and his frankly shabby appearance. She wanted to escape from the family, and Lawrence was the springboard. He himself didn't realize how she'd spun him. He'd seen so many in his bed that another one seemed like a passable option. But that wasn't the case. Samantha had a beastly grip. The producer couldn't break free. After all, you have to get married, and the image of a married man will play into the hands. The girl is beautiful, not stupid. Let it be her. If I had known how it would end, I would have married a fool. Lawrence grinned bitterly. He began cheating on Samantha almost immediately. Lawrence knew about it, but asked him not to make it public. He knew perfectly well that married to a young girl, it was foolish to demand fidelity. He does not need fidelity. He needs a beautiful picture of a happy family life of a famous producer. Am I asking too much for the money I'm giving you? You could have portrayed a happy wife. He resented. Samantha, a little imitation, and then went off the rails. Michael was the first call. Before him there were many young and different, but it was all entertainment. But Michael was serious. She even talked about divorce. Lawrence didn't object. He was sick of it. He just asked her to wait a little longer. He was finishing up a project. Didn't want to give the press a reason to gossip. I thought it was settled. But apparently there was someone else besides Michael. Lawrence noticed that Samantha began to behave inadequately. She sleeps all day, then cries, then pounces on him with fists. Strange behavior was increasingly conspicuous. What is most unpleasant? Not only Lawrence, whose worst fears had come true. Samantha was taking drugs. Lawrence panicked, couldn't let the news get out. He treated her in secret, so God forbid anyone found out. He took his wife to an expensive closed hospital, which kept the secrets of clients more than an... Samantha was treated well there. She came back completely sane, behaved herself. If she had cheated, Lawrence didn't know it now. He didn't need anything else. We live normally. We observe decency and all right, he reasoned. When Samantha announced that she was pregnant, he calmed down. Everyone's calmed down. She will give birth to a child, at least some time to stay at home. Look, and everything will improve, hoped Lawrence. But it wouldn't. In vain he hoped. Immediately after Mary's birth, Samantha's mission accomplished sign lit up in front of her. Nothing was holding her back anymore. She threw tantrums, screaming that she didn't want to live with such an ugly, fat, disgusting man. Well, if you don't want to, don't live. All fed up, break up. Lawrence decided. He bought an apartment, deposited a huge sum of money, and got divorced. Michael, wait. Something does not add up. Interrupted him, Jessica. If she had an apartment, why was she traveling all over the country? Why was she hiding from you? Very original hiding, Lawrence grinned. Calling from everywhere, yelling that I'd put her and her daughter in another hole, demanding money. I sent more than what I'd left in the divorce and had already transferred. Over the years, you could live in your own villa somewhere in the Maldives. Why did you send the pictures to Greece? Jessica asked. I didn't send anything, Lawrence said. I was glad she had settled down. I hoped she'd stay there longer. I was willing to keep paying to get her off my back. But I guess she showed her true colors there too. The Greeks kicked her out. Back in the States, Samantha took revenge on Lawrence, but he didn't know why. Whether she hired detectives or many friends, she tracked down Lawrence and his mistress. The new young wife was unimpressed by the news. She's got her own nose to the grindstone. And she wasn't interested in Lawrence as a man, only as a sponsor. Where and with whom he partied, it didn't matter. When Samantha got to the financial documents, Lawrence was angry. Why bite the hand that feeds you? If I go broke, Samantha will be out of money too. At least think of your daughter, he resented. Lawrence tolerated cheating and everything else. But when his life's work was at stake, there was no room for pity. He was determined to stop Samantha. Sure, she's messed up my life, but it's not critical. I'm not an invertebrate amoeba that's so easy to snack on. I'll get my name and influence back, Lawrence pondered. I haven't figured out what to do about Samantha yet. I know where your husband is. He really is with her. But don't be frightened. I'm not going to do anything to them. I'm not a gangster from the 90s. I have no beef with Michael at all. Samantha's always had a way with men. I'm a case in point. But I don't know how to stop her. I can't lock her up in a hospital. Wait, Michael, but she's got your daughter with her. What's going to happen to her? Jessica asked worriedly. I never believed she was my daughter. But it doesn't matter. I'm her father on paper. I have no other children. And Mary is a wonderful girl. Hey, did you have any contact with her? Mary was little, and her mom was traveling around, and sometimes she'd leave her with me for a month or two. When Mary got older, Samantha stopped leaving her. I guess she was afraid I'd refuse to take her back someday. Somehow I'd have to explain to the girl who I was. So don't worry about Mary. I'll be happy to have her live with me, Lawrence said. Jessica's head was spinning. She did not know who to believe. In front of her sat an old, ugly, and unhappy man with tired eyes. A lot of work, a lot of money, and no happiness in the past or in the future. Could she trust him? Somehow she believed he wouldn't hurt Michael. He doesn't want Michael. He'd let him go. But what about Samantha? Or is Lawrence not telling the truth? Why would he? He could just not tell his story to a woman he doesn't know. Or is Samantha really sick? You don't make up a creepy husband story like that in your right mind. Michael, I'm not asking what you're going to do. You're not going to tell me. But one last question. Why did you marry again to a young poor girl with ambition, who sees in you only a bag of money? Jessica asked. You can't believe that she loves you. Why do you have to go through this again? Jessica wondered. No, the rake. It's not the same, Lawrence grinned. My present wife does not love me, of course. I know all about myself and look in the mirror. But it's not Samantha. Just a young, stupid hick who wants fame. As soon as success looms, she'll dump me and never remember me again. Yet smart and calculating Samantha goes a long way. The truth is, I'm beginning to think Samantha's not well. I don't know why she's getting back at me. It's like a mania. She's always had a lot on her mind. But now her cockroaches are just running wild. Jessica felt sorry for the poor man. Money really isn't everything, she thought. Yes, he's not white and fluffy, but he's not a villain who gets his ex-wife. It seemed to Jessica that he felt sorry for his wife, albeit ex-wife, and his daughter, albeit not his own. Jessica had heard everything she wanted to hear. She didn't know where Michael was, but she knew he was safe. No, so he'd be back soon. Okay, we'll meet him, Jessica said, as she was about to leave. But Lawrence suddenly said, Jessica, you are a very beautiful woman. I was looking at you and thinking, do you know where I've seen you? I know, in an old French movie. You're not from here. You're from over there. Don't be frightened. I'm not going to charm you. You're not my type. I guess it's none of my business, but Michael's out of your league too. He's not worthy of you. How many years have you wasted on him? Isn't that enough? There's still time for you to be happy. Do you really love him? I'm sorry to be so frank. You don't love him. Then why do you love him? Look at me. You're looking at a man who thinks he can live without love. Don't make the same mistakes I did. Be happy. Ashrika was leaving, he said to her. Remember, my story mustn't get out. If anything appears in the press, I'll know you did it. You're the only person I've ever spilled my guts to. I warn you, if you do, I'll be your personal enemy. It was harsh and demanding. Jessica drove home in the morning, replaying the information in her head. It didn't make sense. Now Josh was going to say that Samantha was the victim of a tyrant husband. Jessica didn't believe that anymore. He's not a tyrant, just an unhappy man who makes money but realizes he can't buy happiness with it. I feel sorry for him, but I pity myself even more. I've spent half my life trying to build a happy family, and where is it? Some lunatic lured Michael in and he ran after her, forgetting he had a family. Well, that's a family that's worthless. It's time to take my head out of the sand, Jessica pondered. The house was packed. They sat worried, blaming themselves for letting Jessica go alone. They were terribly glad that she had returned alive and unharmed. Jessica carefully, without elaboration, spilled all the information. As expected, Josh didn't believe it. Jess, you're a smart woman. How could he woo you so quickly? Josh, what do you know besides what Samantha said about herself? Her friend Lena, who believes Samantha is the victim of a tyrant husband, hasn't seen her either. You can say anything on the phone. How do you check? I'm not saying that everything Lawrence said is true, but the image of your infallible Samantha has gotten a little fuzzy, Jessica said. Ingrid, sensing the growing disagreement, quickly intervened. Nice break. What are you arguing about? If I understand correctly, there are no complaints about Michael. Then Casanova will be here soon. We'll ask him. But when you think about it, your Samantha is kind of weird. Don't you think so, Josh? Josh didn't say anything, but he didn't deny it. Samantha was a friend, of course, and he was willing to help her. But lately, he wished she'd go away. I'm not refusing to help. Distance is not an obstacle, he thought. They agreed that Michael was safe and would be back soon. Samantha was lying a lot, but Lawrence wasn't going to take revenge on her. Everything seemed fine, but Jessica didn't care about Michael or Samantha. She didn't know what to do with her life. Had she loved Michael when she got married? Of course she did. He was so handsome. Her heart sank, the thin, intelligent face, the suave manners. Now Jessica was asking herself, is this enough for a happy life? Well, you're so wise now. And then such questions did not occur to you. Yes, if youth knew. And it's too early to talk about old age. Well, amateur detectives. Any thoughts on what to do next? Jessica asked. No, I don't. It's a dead end. I mean, it's all so clear, but what's the point? I don't know where Samantha is. Why isn't Michael coming back? It doesn't make sense, the other said. Jessica wanted to lie down and think. The wisest thoughts come to her before she sleeps. Dear guests, don't you have to go? She hinted. Ingrid and Josh didn't object. Now, yes, it's time, they said, and hurriedly got ready. Wow, I missed something. Ingrid, what a bitch. How did she get here so fast? She's always been like that, though, and no one can keep up, Jessica thought. She lay down, but she couldn't sleep. She thought about her life. It was strange to think of her life with Michael as something that had passed. She had never imagined living without him. Now I'd have to get used to it. It was terribly depressing. When he came back, he'd probably explain everything, apologize. But Jessica wouldn't be able to live with him, to pretend that nothing had happened. She can't. She'll always remember the betrayal. I wonder if he'll tell the truth or lie. Jessica pondered. Michael showed up the next day. He came over, kissed her cheek carelessly, looked into her eyes, tried to understand what was waiting for him and how to behave. Nay, Jess, I'm sorry. I had a work emergency. I had to leave, and I broke my phone accidentally, so I couldn't call. Okay, I'm gonna lie. Of course, no one has a phone but yours, Jessica said sarcastically. Michael, before you tell a bunch of lies, I want to tell you that I've been looking for you. I was at the cottage. I know about Samantha. Her daughter's sleeping in the bedroom. How'd you leave that girl alone? Samantha never remembered her until now. Also, keep in mind that I saw Lawrence. He told me his side of the story. So without humiliating yourself by lying, why do you care so much about Samantha that you got involved in a murky story and weren't afraid to lose your family? Michael must have come up with some story that was convenient for him, but Jessica messed up his plans, and he had no choice but to tell the truth. It's unclear how much she knows, but it's dangerous to get caught in a lie. I don't know how to explain it, Michael began. When I saw her, I knew I couldn't say no. I knew she was dragging me into something bad, but she needed help. You know, it was like a spell, like hypnosis. She was so convincing about Lawrence's abuse, or so his meanness. I didn't even doubt it was true. The only thing I could do was try to talk it out, to dismiss it. I was afraid it would be worse. Well, to be perfectly honest, I chickened out. I knew it would be bad for me too. Samantha showed up when she got back from Greece. We saw each other occasionally. She told me more and more details about Lawrence's abuse. Michael believed her. His heart broke with pity for the fragile, unhappy, unjustly accused of all the sins of a woman. Michael was eager to help, rushing to every call. Then he got tired of rushing. More and more often flashed the thought that before her appearance he lived a normal, quiet life and would not mind return to such a life. But now Samantha wouldn't let go, calling, sobbing, demanding help. The last call was hysterical. Her husband had figured out where she lived. She had to run, but she had nowhere to go. Michael rushed to Samantha's apartment. She was frantically shoving things into her bag, pushing her daughter. Hurry, 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 hurry. He'll be here any minute. I've got so much dirt, he won't get away with it. He'll answer for everything. Mary, don't poke around. Put those toys down. Come on, let's go. As Michael drove them to the cottage, Samantha talked excitedly about how she would exact revenge on Lawrence. Michael tried to talk her out of it, begging her to give it up. It was too dangerous. Different weight classes. If you piss Lawrence off, he'd retaliate in a way that would be devastating. Samantha couldn't hear, screaming that no one understood how much she'd suffered at the hands of this man. For a moment, Michael thought she wasn't quite right. She kept saying Lawrence was stalking her, but in the time he'd been with her, Michael had never seen him, not even a phone call. On the contrary, it seemed as if Samantha was stalking her ex-husband, some kind of obsessive stalking. It's unclear who's after whom, Michael continued. Tired of Samantha's inadequacy, he tried to convince her to leave. He promised to find a safe place. Now, if there's no money to move, I will. That's the kind of money he offered. Jessica laughed. The laugh was hearty and a little hysterical. The money she'd scraped out of Lawrence was enough for 3 lifetimes. You'll never make that much. Jess, please stop humiliating me. I know I was a fool to fall for it. I don't know what it was. It was an obsession. Yeah, it was an obsession. Hypnosis. The evil eye. Isn't that a little too mystical? What kind of hypnosis did you forget about me under? Do you have any idea what I went through when you disappeared? I was sure you were in trouble. I was ready to tear up those policemen who sneered at me. They said your husband was out and would come back. I didn't think you'd just run off with your mistress. Why did you come back? Did not like living with a crazy woman? Jessica continued. Nay, Jess, I'm sorry. No, I'm not. Keep talking. Why didn't you leave her at the cottage? You knew by then she was safe. Let her live. You could have come home and told me everything. Didn't you ever think of that simple option? That's what I was going to do, but it didn't work out. I didn't get home in time, Michael explained. Samantha called again and demanded that I go back to the cottage. She said that I had to go to some acquaintances who had obtained material on Lawrence. They're willing to leak it online, but they need to be paid. We have to do it now, so Lawrence will be unstoppable. Why he obeyed again, Michael did not understand. But he turned around and drove to the cottage. Samantha was already at the fence. She jumped into the car. Let's go, she commanded. Michael was still trying to appeal to her maternal sensibilities. Race. Who's the girl gonna stay with? Michael didn't listen. They drove for a long time. Samantha was agitated and impatient. All the time pushing Michael, she said with gloating. That's it, he's finished. That's it now. As they were thrashing around, it was scary. Samantha's behavior seemed too strange to Michael. At some point, he had a sense of unreality about what was happening. He couldn't believe he was participating in this absurdity. What am I doing here? Why am I doing this? He thought. When they arrived, Samantha told Michael to wait and walked into the entryway. He sat waiting, lost track of time, didn't realize how long he had been here. But for some reason, he wouldn't leave. He remembered Jessica, tried to think of how he would explain himself to her. There was a longing in his soul, and he wanted to leave everything and return to his quiet, happy life. Despair was setting in. Michael realized that his life would never be the same. But he didn't leave. He waited. He woke up when he realized that he had been sitting for hours. He called Samantha, but she didn't answer. So Michael got out of the car, stood, walked over, and went into the driveway. Where to find Samantha, he had no idea. He decided to knock on all the doors one by one. A grandmother who looked like a fairy flower with pink hair slowly descended the stairs. She was followed by a small dog that looked just like her, only not pink. Michael still dared to ask her if she had seen the girl in the light-colored jacket, and where she might have gone. Young man, even if I seem strange to you, you could have said hello. I haven't seen your girlfriend, but there is one apartment on the 5th floor where many people go in but few come out. Look for her there, she replied. Who the hell is she, a witch? Michael thought as he walked up to the 5th floor. He didn't even have to think about which door was which. One was half open. Entering, he found himself in a narrow hallway with flickering lights and peeling wallpaper. As he walked further down, he saw a large room with about 10 people in it. Some sitting, some lying down, and some walking back and forth. No one paid Michael any attention, as if he didn't exist. A kind of looking glass opened before him. Michael had never seen such a place before, but he immediately recognized the essence of what was happening. He tried to see who could be Samantha. He found her, picked her up in his arms, and headed for the exit. The others showed no interest in who was being carried, or they were being carried. Their gazes were blank, as if they saw nothing around them. Putting Samantha in the back seat of the car, Michael got behind the wheel and realized he didn't know where he was going. Probably to the hospital. But if Samantha was taken there, he would be locked up in a treatment facility. What would become of Mary then? And what would happen to him when Samantha found out that he was the one who sent her there? Without medical attention, she could die. Michael dialed the number of a doctor he knew, gave the address of Samantha's last refuge, and drove to the location. The doctor arrived quickly, treated Samantha, gave her shots, put her on an IV, and said that the patient needed constant supervision. He took a fee for his services and left. Michael was left alone. Sitting next to a nearly motionless Samantha, he thought about how it was that his life had descended to this. He wished he could get rid of all his troubles and go back to his wife. It was clear to him that Jessica was unlikely to forgive him. He wondered how he'd gotten himself into all this. At first, old feelings flared up. After all, he remembered how strong love had once been. Then came the desire to prove himself a hero, the savior of his beloved from the encroachments of the villain. When he realized that the princess was independent enough to fend for herself, it was too late to change anything. He found himself too deeply involved in the situation. He would have continued to sit next to Samantha, tormented by thoughts of rescue. But suddenly there was a call from Lawrence. Not to Michael, of course, but to Samantha. But Michael answered. Silently, without explanation, Lawrence said that Michael could be out. He would look after Samantha himself. Michael didn't object. He left the place in a hurry, and there he was, standing there so familiar and close. He's back. First he left her, now Samantha. I can see why he left Samantha. Things had gotten too tense, too tiring. Tired of having to sacrifice himself. I longed to return to my youth, to relive the vivid feelings, but I couldn't. A life of mixed fantasies was too disturbing. What was wrong with Jessica? Jessica looked at Michael with difficulty, and inside her flared the desire to strike him in his graceful, cultured face. The face that had always been so neat, to make his appearance distorted with pain, to make him cease to be attractive, to make her have no desire to admire him, no desire to rejoice in his return. Wanted to rid herself of any warm feelings for him. He didn't deserve it, but she held back. I didn't hit him. Michael didn't even realize how deeply he'd hurt her. How could he do that? He didn't think about how much it hurt her, how skillfully he'd packaged his anger in an attractive shell. Look how honest I've been. I didn't lie. I came and told her the truth. And now he's standing there looking at me and doesn't understand what the problem is. After all, he came back, told everything, repented, even asked for forgiveness. Jessica should have forgiven him as a sign of gratitude for the fact that he came back and felt pity for her poor husband, who had been through so much. She should have thrown herself into his arms with tears in her eyes, stroked his head and assured him that everything terrible was over and everything would be all right. Jessica stood motionless, her gaze glassy, sending shivers down Michael's spine. She was silent, and he couldn't understand her thoughts. Obviously, a quick reconciliation scene with a happy resolution was not going to work out. Michael decided to wait it out. He hadn't even considered the idea that Jessica wouldn't forgive him, not now or ever in the future. And Jessica's only wish seemed to be that this man was never around again, that he would leave and never show up again. "Will you please leave now?" she said, trying to remain calm. "What do you mean, leave? Where am I going?" Michael didn't understand. "Get out of here. Go away. Get out," shouted Jessica, already desperate. Michael was stunned. Never before had he seen his tactful and calm wife in such a furious state. He was scared and confused. Michael realized it was time to leave before her condition turned into a full-blown tantrum. He couldn't imagine how this explosion of emotion might end, and he didn't want to find out. "Okay, I'll stay at the cottage for now. Then we'll talk," he said as he made his way outside. When the door closed behind Michael, Jessica couldn't hold back any longer and burst into tears. Mary, peering into the room fearfully, cautiously walked over and hugged her. "Jessica, do you want me to get you some tea? You cry for a while and I'll put the kettle on," she offered affectionately. Something clenched in Jessica's heart. Perhaps for the first time she realized that she wished she had a child, someone to help her cope with the pain and give her the strength to go on living. But right now, she felt alone. Jessica tried to do something to take her mind off the pain, but the tears wouldn't stop flowing. It was like she was trying to cry out all the loneliness and pain of the last few days. Mary, without imposing, came in from time to time to see if everything was all right, realizing that Olga needed space. In the evening, Emily's friend came in and, seeing Jessica's condition, picked her up in a friendly manner and took her into the kitchen. While Jessica sat there, Emily quickly set the table, poured a shot of cognac, and asked her friend to drink, trying to support her in some way and help her overcome her grief. "Okay, well, now eat and tell me about it," Emily suggested. Barely holding back tears, Jessica began the story of her husband's return. "Emily, tell me, do men think differently? He told me everything. Look, I still don't understand what happened, and I can see he's not faking it. He really doesn't understand. Can I live with him? Look, friend, divorce is not a disaster," Emily reassured her. "I'm speaking as someone who's been through it. Don't rush to make a decision on emotion. When we were young, we were all categorical, but now sometimes compromise seems to be the best solution. Everything needs to be well thought out, and stop crying," Emily said very warmly. "In my case, compromise is not an option," Jessica countered. "After all, I don't love Michael. Or maybe I never have. Do you think it's because of him that I'm crying? No, I'm crying for me. I feel sorry for myself. How ridiculous my life has been. No love, no children. Now no husband." Jessica drowned in her self-pity, tears flowing. "Friends exist to support you, to tell you that you are a good girl, to wipe away your tears and add a little cognac." That's what they did. Gradually, the dialogue descended to the usual complaints of resentful women. "We are so beautiful and smart, we earn our own money, but we are not lucky in our personal lives. Where do men look? And in fact, where are these men? I guess they are no longer around." This conversation continued along the well-known route. How bad men are and how unfair life is to them. Here I am, a fool admired, always for a great love, married in for life. But you chose Michael for his reliability, stability, and the chance to live without concussions. Was I wrong? Did you miss something about him? Or is it your own fault? He'd come to believe that I wouldn't go anywhere, that I'd keep everything simple. In the end, he became the husband I raised him to be. So what? We're going to blame ourselves now. You're not the one who got involved with the ex. No, you left when you realized she wasn't herself. You didn't get involved in a risky venture to ruin Lawrence, Emily said indignantly. And you didn't decide that despite having a family, she was the one to save. Come to your senses, friend, and stop defending that scoundrel. Maybe you're even thinking of forgiving him. You can try, but it won't do you any good. It's scary to be alone at 40, isn't it? Isn't it scarier to look him in the eye every day, expecting another betrayal, and about being alone? You know, I have some thoughts, she added. Are you out of your mind or what? What options are there in my position? Jessica interjected. We'll see about that, Emily exclaimed confidently. I myself once thought there was no choice, but it turns out there is. Inga was talking with such gusto about Josh's charms, his politeness, his intelligence, his beauty, that Jessica realized that her friend had been carried away again. How can you believe after a couple days of knowing him that he's the one for you? He didn't teach you the first time, and now it's like a fresh start again, into everything in the world without a backward glance. Jessica envied Emily in her own way. I wish I could be like that, maybe sometime in the future, but not now. Right now, I have to get a divorce, sell the apartment, split things. It's all so painful and unpleasant. I didn't think life could turn out like that. She thought, you can still turn it around, pretend you've forgiven. Go on living a measured, unhappy, but peaceful life. Not ready for change, though it often comes unexpectedly. While Emily dreamed of her happiness, Jessica pondered how loneliness was saved. At least she's got kids. And here she was, lonely. Speaking of children, oh my God, where's Mary? Jessica exclaimed fearfully and hurried into the room. Mary was asleep, tired after a long day. Jessica, Did you feed her today? Emily inquired. No, you didn't. Jessica smiled. She was the one who gave me tea and brought me sandwiches, keeping an eye on me to make sure I didn't do anything stupid. Strange, with a mom like that and a nomadic life. Mary is a perfectly adequate child, Jessica reasoned, and now her mom will probably have to go into rehab. What's going to happen to Mary? No one seems to take much interest in her fate. Yeah, it's weird, Emily agreed. We should get going. She pulled out her cell phone and dialed a number. Girlfriend. Can you pick me up at Jessica's? Thanks. Emily sent the photo and smiled at the response. What tenderness. God, well, at least you be happy. The next morning, Mr. Lawrence himself called Jessica. He invited, or rather announced, that he was expecting her for lunch, and the car would arrive at the appointed time. Jessica felt anxious. It was clear what the conversation would be about. Or rather, about whom? About whom? About Mary. Jessica thought that now her daughter would be discussed, and she herself meant nothing to Lawrence. It was sad to part with the girl who had been such a comfort to her during the last few days, but her feelings were apparently unimportant. The meeting took place again in a restaurant, where a polite waiter again greeted them and Lawrence, who had aged noticeably during these days. Hello, Jessica. It's good to see you. You won't believe this, but in the last few days, you are the first person I've had a pleasant conversation with. The others are either sympathetic or mean. Michael, may I ask how Samantha is doing? Jessica asked hesitantly. Michael told her that after Michael left, he went to Samantha's house. He found her in a semi-conscious state and called an ambulance. The doctors were clear. Very severe poisoning, needing sophisticated equipment and round-the-clock care that couldn't be provided at home. Michael experienced déjà vu, remembering the past and wondering why he was involved in this story again. The ex-wife, who had left him decades ago, was once again affecting his life. He reproached himself. What nonsense, Michael, still hoping? She's sick. Even after recovery, she'll never be the girl you knew. But he couldn't let Samantha die alone. He knew that no amount of treatment was a guarantee, but he couldn't abandon her. Jessica looked at Michael Lawrence, feeling how hard it was for him to even utter those words. You can't decide how to tell her you're her daddy because you're afraid you won't impress her. I think Mary would be happy to know she has a real father who wants to see her and be there for her. I only spent a few days with her, but I sensed how much she needed someone of her own. Someone close to her. And the fact that you can be there for her is already more than most people can offer. Jessica sensed how much Michael needed those words, confirmation that he could be a good father to his daughter despite all his past mistakes. Maybe I don't have the right to say this, but I'm scared of losing Mary. She's become someone very close to me, and I don't want her to disappear from my life. Maybe I could see her once in a while, take a walk in the park, go to a cafe, maybe the zoo. I understand if you're against it, but she's become a part of my life, Jessica said quietly, feeling how important it was for her not to lose touch with the girl. Michael listened, nodding thoughtfully. Jessica, I can see that my daughter has grown attached to you, and I think she'll be only too happy to spend time with you. But first, I want to mend our relationship, show her that I'm her father. After that, I'd love it if you could keep seeing each other. At home, Jessica already had Michael waiting for her, and the atmosphere was tense. We need to talk, he said, frantically pulling on his jacket and trying to appear calm. But Jessica deferred the conversation until she met Mary, who was waiting downstairs for Uncle Michael. You remember Uncle Michael, don't you? You used to visit him when you were little. Your mom used to leave you at his place. Will you go to see him? Jessica asked gently. You want me to go? Am I boring you? Mary looked innocently at Jessica, her face reflecting fear and hope at the same time. No, it's not that, baby girl. It's just that your mom is sick, will be in the hospital for a long time. You're going to live with Uncle Michael. That's your real daddy. He really wants to be there for you and take care of you. Jessica tried to explain the situation as gently as possible, trying to hide her pain from the other. Mary stood in front of Jessica, her eyes shining with joy and tenderness. Jessica felt a moment of peace in her heart. This little person seemed to be able to weave all the pieces of her broken heart back together. You mean a lot to me, Mary, Jessica said quietly, and I'm so glad you have a daddy who loves you very much, and that we'll be able to see each other. That makes me incredibly happy. Mary's confession that Michael was her daddy was so pure and simple that Jessica's pain instantly dissipated, leaving only a smile on her face. And that's our little secret, Jessica smiled back, kissing Mary on the top of her head. She promised herself that she would keep this little happiness going as best she could, for the desire for a better life, the determination to stand up for her happiness. It all made sense when Jessica held Mary's hand, feeling her endless trust and love. And even though the road ahead was not an easy one, in that moment Jessica knew she could overcome all challenges. She knew that life was full of surprises, but now she had a new purpose: to share those surprises with the people she loved, to find moments of joy even where there seemed to be none. And Mary's laughter was a bright ray of light on her path. Vanessa was on her way to her mother Jessica's hospital. On the way, she was leafing through a fashion magazine she found on a bench at the bus stop. Rich, beautiful, and successful models with perfect makeup and hairstyles, dressed in clothes of famous brands, looked at the girl from the pages. Their beauty was so bright, so perfect, that Vanessa did not even think of envy. It didn't occur to her that she could look good in expensive clothes after a visit to the salon. There was no room for anything expensive in her and her mother's quiet and modest life. Her mother had worked as a nurse in a polyclinic all her life, with occasional part-time jobs as an orderly and cleaner. Vanessa tried to help her as much as possible. The girl never asked about her father. Only once her mother misspoke, saying that people like him would never get in touch with people like them. What did she mean, and what hidden meaning did she put in that phrase? It remained a mystery to Vanessa. In her earliest childhood, the girl had been terribly curious to know who her daddy was. She didn't dare to ask about him as a child, so she could fantasize about him as much as she wanted. The fact that he was not written in her birth documents added even more mystery to him. The girl grew up, and with her grew the role of her father in her fantasies. In time, she began to imagine that he spent his life performing important and dangerous tasks. He was strictly forbidden to disclose the family. That's why she and her mom lived in this tiny, forgotten town. Living in it, it was absolutely impossible to believe that some 200 kilometers away was the brilliant city of New York, in which life was boiling and beating key. And their life didn't even flow, it barely ebbed and flowed, finding its way among the eternal busyness of the mother and the quiet, imperceptible hobbies of the daughter. Vanessa herself didn't remember at what point she started writing down her thoughts, dreams about her father, and life stories. By the time she reached the age of consciousness, she had accumulated so many such records that it would be enough for a small book. Going through the records, the girl acquired her first dream to publish a book and become a writer in that order. After all, she needed the approval of her readers to continue. For now, only two obstacles separated her from the moment when the manuscript would see the light of day: money and fear. Fear that her work would not be appreciated. Are you kidding me? Vanessa couldn't say she was unhappy. Mom Jessica, despite the busyness and complete lack of money, always tried to pay attention to her daughter, to please, hug, and cheer up. The girl grew up in love and therefore not so acutely felt the lack of some things: fashionable clothes, expensive toys, and sweets. Every weekend, Mom took the girl by the hand and they went to the park or the forest to walk, get acquainted with nature, feed ducks or fish. Once in class, answering the teacher's question, how she knows so much about animals, plants, nature, the girl told about their little tradition with her mother. So she, without wanting to, and without knowing it, made her first enemy a classmate, Kiara. Kiara grew up in a rich family, but she saw no love, no attention, no care. Expensive toys could not replace parents. Fancy clothes, lively communication, and gadgets, family warmth. The fact that Vanessa possessed all of these things, and therefore bypassed her, ignited an envy in Kiara that quickly turned to hatred. Thoughts jumped around in the girl's head like hairs from one memory to another. Apparently she was ready to think about anything but the fact that the bus would stop at the end of the ride. Vanessa would get off at the final stop and go to the hospital. There for the second week, her mom was in the hospital with no hope of recovery. The doctor repeatedly offered to discharge her home, to live with her family and friends. Vanessa refused. For Jessica's mom, she was the only family and friends she had. But there was no strength to support her mom at all. They were barely enough to drive to her mom's house every day, bring home cooked meals, and stay cheerful. Returning home, she would close the door and slowly slump down on it, biting her lip in pain. The nearest, dearest, and only dear person in her life was leaving. There was nothing she could do about it. One of the orderlies hinted for the girl to start preparing. For what? Vanessa clapped her eyes in bewilderment, not really understanding what she was talking about. And she did. For what? Not for the discharge, for the funeral. What funeral? What are you talking about? Mom will recover and will live like we used to. We'd like that to happen, but this disease doesn't give us a chance. You're wrong. You're wrong. Mom's strong, she'll be fine. Besides, the doctor offered to discharge her. Yes, to live to avoid spending state funds. The woman grinned loudly. Here, Derevyanko, take this and you'll need it. And she handed Vanessa neatly folded bills. No need, we don't need anything. The catchphrase of all those who really need everything. Maybe not you, but you should see your mother off. I'll tell you everything in order tomorrow, or you'll forget something. I told you, you don't have to teach me anything or explain anything. Mom and I are fine. Only 5 days later, Vanessa sobbed in the arms of the same nurse, unable to accept the fact that she was all alone in the world. The old woman stroked her head and quietly repeated that everything would be all right, that Mom was now in a better world, she was not hurt or scared there. And Vanessa thought how scary it is when there are no close and dear people. Not at all. This nurse will wait for the girl to calm down and go about her business. And in a couple of days she'll forget about Vanessa and her grief. And Vanessa will stay and continue to live in a world where no one is interested in how she is and how she feels. Suddenly the nurse said a phrase that, in fact, turned the girl's consciousness upside down and subsequently completely changed her life. And cry now, you and your mother to bury, and father to support. Men bear grief worse, said the nurse. I've never seen yours. When she realized that she had said something wrong, the woman continued. Do you have one, your father? No, and never had one, Vanessa answered. How come? I don't know. I've never seen him. My mom never told me. But any other relatives? No one. Mom was the only one. It's impossible for a man to be alone. If your parents broke up when you were young, foolishly, and then your pride didn't allow you to reconcile, and your father lives somewhere, does not know that he has a beautiful daughter. Then Vanessa did not pay attention to the words of a kind woman, who, by the way, really helped the girl with the organization of the funeral. Advised and prompted how and what should be done. Without her, Vanessa would not have done even half of what she had to do. In the evening after the funeral, Vanessa remembered the nurse's words. Except to say search, and it's easy. And where to begin the search, thought the girl, absolutely no idea. And she decided to start with taking apart her mother's archive, a massive old dresser filled with various useful and useless but memorable things. Several drawers were occupied by Vanessa's mother's document school, leaving certificates, diplomas, letters, and photos. As a child, the girl often went through them in search of something interesting. Then she didn't pay much attention to old photographs and letters, half of which she couldn't even read because of illegible handwriting. Today she wanted to study everything thoroughly. Among the papers she found the deeds to the apartment. It turned out that the apartment had belonged to her for many years. A deed of gift had been made in her name, but the name of the donor was unfamiliar to Vanessa, and the date was approximately the same as the date of birth of the girl. After spending the night without sleep, trying to make sense of everything that was stored in her mother's dresser, by morning Vanessa was forced to admit that she had learned nothing new. The letters stored were from her parents' girlfriends. Vanessa knew Mom's parents had left this world long before she came along. Mom had been in medical school then. Barely self-sufficient, she was left alone. Then she'd found support in friends and a certain David. Vanessa was interested in the mention of the young man, but he was only mentioned a couple of times. Not enough for the man who later became the father of her child. And the references were odd. David brought her, drove her, helped her. It was like she wasn't talking about her lover, but a longshoreman. Unpacking the largest box of letters, the girl at the bottom found a postcard from a Black Sea resort. Strange, Vanessa said to herself. Mom never said she had been to the sea. The postcard was addressed to her parents. It said that the girl was doing well and the vacation was going well. Well, it turns out Mom had a busy life. and I saw her always busy, tired, running from one job to another, thought Vanessa. In another box, as if to confirm her thoughts, Vanessa found a photo of her mother from the seashore. She was looking at her as a young girl, no more than 20 years old. She was smiling radiantly, hugging the young man around the waist. The problem was that the young man himself was mercilessly torn from the photo. Neither his face nor even his height could be determined. So interesting, Vanessa said. So Mom went on vacation with a certain young man, probably most likely my father. Apparently their relationship didn't work out with my mom. She threw his picture away and never told me anything. After rummaging through the rest of the papers, hoping to find the second part of the photo, Vanessa had to give up. Dawn was dawning outside the window. She began to drift off to sleep. In her dream, she saw her mother young and cheerful again. She was running along the edge of the sea and laughing. A young man was following her with big steps. He opened his arms, trying to catch the girl in his arms, but each time she managed to slip out of his reach. Vanessa tried to see the young man's face, but it kept dissolving in the glare of the sun. Vanessa awoke just before noon. The June sun was shining brightly outside the window. She had to decide how to live in general and what to do today in particular. She decided to start by tidying up the apartment to take her mind off things. But even while she was busy with her physical work, she couldn't stop thinking about how to move on. Vanessa had a brilliant 9th grade school certificate and a red diploma from the teacher's college she had entered after a classmate, Kiara, had made her stay at school unbearable. Vanessa could not understand when she crossed the road, daughter of rich parents, and what earned her hatred. Just one day the girl hated her, a quiet, unremarkable, excellent student who never said a word against anyone. Kiara turned out to be very persistent and inventive in terms of mischief. In just 3 years, she had developed such an active activity to turn Vanessa's life into a nightmare that the famous quiet girl had no choice but to look for a suitable school and transfer. It was pointless to change schools. Ciara had acquaintances everywhere. So Vanessa, at the age of 18, was almost a specialist. However, she did not have time to rejoice in her diploma. The departure of her mother made all the joys dim and insignificant. For a whole week, Vanessa tried to find a job by specialty in schools and kindergartens. It turned out that no one needed young specialists with a great desire to work, but a complete lack of experience. The money, which after the funeral was left very little, quickly ran out, and Vanessa had to sharply lower the bar of requirements for work. Now she was happy to take any position as long as she could get money for food. She posted her resume everywhere she could, but no one was willing to hire her. Finally, late one night, the phone rang. "Vanessa, good afternoon. You placed an ad for a job. Is it still up to date?" asked on the other end of the line. "Yes, of course," replied the girl, practically jumping with joy with the receiver in her hands. "Are you not embarrassed by the offer to work as a maid?" "No, I'm ready for any kind of work now." "Great. Then they'll be expecting you tomorrow. I'll text you the address. Try to be there no later than 10. The personnel manager is a finicky man. He doesn't like to be late," the phone said. "By the way, are you ready to move to the employer's house?" "Yes, I guess I'm ready." "Where does he live?" "Staten Island." "In principle, you can come from home, but we have situations when you need to stay longer or get up early." "Where is Staten Island?" "I don't know," Vanessa admitted, who had never left her hometown. "Staten Island is a borough of New York City. That's the city you listed on your resume." Vanessa remembered that she had actually written that in a few sentences, not really hoping for a response. "I probably won't make it by 10 tomorrow. I live in another city." "Which one?" asked on the other end of the line. Having heard the answer, the interlocutor didn't seem to be surprised. "In the morning, you will take the train from your city. It leaves at 6, and you will be met at the station. If you are ready to work, pack everything you need at once." "What exactly would I need to be a maid?" Vanessa asked. Ahead, at least, the caller grinned and hung up. Vanessa sat down on the floor, puzzled. The offer was as unexpected and mysterious as possible. They were ready to send an automobile to the train for the maid. She was so surprised by this offer that she forgot to ask about salary and working conditions. And what was the point of these questions? After all, the girl had never worked, she did not even have a labor book. Besides, the money was enough only for a ticket. Well, it's not much of a choice to starve here for another week, or to take a risk and go to work in the city of dreams. I think the decision is obvious. I'm going, the girl said to herself and went to pack her things. Vanessa, who had never left the city, was faced with a very difficult choice. But what to take with her on the trip? What would come in handy for work? How would she leave the apartment? With the apartment account, the solution was obvious: give the keys to her neighbor to keep an eye on her. Late one night, Vanessa knocked on the neighbor's door. "Jessica, could you help me out?" she asked. "Yes, Vanessa, what's wrong? What are you doing up so late?" "I already went to bed," the neighbor replied. Vanessa knew perfectly well that the neighbor was lying. No one knew when she slept or if she slept at all. She was awake at all hours of the day and always saw and heard everything. She was aware of every incident, every gossip, every scandal. "Jessica, I have to leave early tomorrow morning. I'll leave the spare keys. You keep an eye on the apartment," Vanessa said. "Where do you think you're going?" The girl's first impulse was to keep silent. After all, tomorrow not only the whole entrance, but the whole city will know about her plans. If anyone in the city is even interested in her modest person. However, having judiciously reasoned that to go to an unknown place, without warning anyone, is definitely not worth it, she replied. "I'm going to New York to get a job. We couldn't find anything here. We need something to live on." "Are you going to look for your father?" the woman asked in a bizarre way. "Who?" "You know, my father. I thought he was from New York." "How do you even know about my father? My mom never told me anything about him." There was nothing to tell. They didn't even get to know each other before she got pregnant and he ran away from her. "How do you know that?" "We moved into this apartment when I was born." The woman hesitated. It was obvious that she was trying to find the words to answer. "Well, people said that you were born to some important man. That's the apartment your mother was given. But your parents didn't have anything serious. I don't know anything else. Don't ask. You know me. I've got no bones in my mouth." "What I would have known, I would have told you," the old woman said, as Vanessa prepared to ask more. "I'm going to apply for a job as a maid in the house of some wealthy man. I'll write to you as soon as I'm settled." "Of course you will. What if they take away your passport and take you where?" "To the border." Vanessa was surprised. "You may be quiet, but you're a good-looking girl." "Jessica, don't worry. They won't like someone like me," she shook her head. "Well, you shouldn't be like that. Your mother, she was the same." All her life, Vanessa considered herself unworthy of relationships. Everyone was ashamed that she was raised by her mother without a husband. And the guys who were chasing her long ago, maybe they could have lifted her out of poverty. She'd be alive now. I feel sorry for Vanessa. The old woman really well treated the young, quiet neighbor, who alone tried to raise her daughter, Kiara. It was a shame that she, having lived such a hard life, had left this world so young. Vanessa's mom was barely over 40. However, she looked in recent years no less than 60. Classmates took her for Vanessa's grandmother, and only she saw her as a beauty. And here, perhaps also a neighbor. Having collected everything necessary, Vanessa packed a change of clothes, documents, and the rest of the money. The girl closed the apartment and went to the train station. There were only a couple hours left before the train. Staying alone in the apartment was becoming more and more difficult. A city station at any time of the day is quite a sight. Not for nothing they say that train stations have seen more sincere love than marriage palaces. Vanessa witnessed the real emotions of parting, meeting, friendship, and love. It's as if at the moment of the last meeting before the road or the first after the separation, people's soul opens a little wider, and only the most sincere emotions are the first to burst out of it. Later, when the moment passes, people become more reserved and reserved. When the train came to the platform, the girl turned around for the last time and looked at the city she had grown up in and was now leaving, without much regret. I must say, what, in fact, can these streets and houses mean if there is no one left in the city who is dear to your heart? It so happened that she had no school friends and girlfriends. Or rather, once they had been, but the incomprehensible war, which was declared to her by a classmate, made everyone turn away from her. For 3 years of this war, not only Vanessa and all the other guys could not understand why Kiara was so beaten up on her. The fact that a rich, fashionable girl could simply envy the quiet Vanessa didn't even cross anyone's mind. For some reason, it was at the moment of leaving town that Vanessa remembered her high school years. Probably so that she finally confirmed the correctness of the decision to leave the city and not return. Sitting in the station building, she decided that she would stay in New York, and if the maid job didn't work out, she would find another one. The main thing to get a foothold in the big city, and return to her native tiny town without the prospect of forever will have time. Having made up her mind, she entered the carriage, changed her clothes, and fell into a sound and healthy sleep for the first time in months. Shortly before arriving at the New York train station, her phone rang. "Vanessa, are you there?" "Yes, in half an hour." "Yes." "Great. There's a car waiting for you." The caller gave the license plate number and a parking spot. Sitting in the cabin, she looked around the city with amazement. It seemed that she was in a fairy tale. Beautiful old buildings, bridges, parks, as if descended from the illustrations of fashion magazines. And here, amidst all this splendor, she was to live. Vanessa didn't think at all about the work she had to do. She was not afraid of hard or dirty work. She realized that she could hardly expect anything more now. But one thing she knew for sure was that she was not leaving this city. From the busy streets, the driver turned into a picturesque area. Multi-story buildings were replaced by beautiful mansions. Vanessa didn't even try to imagine who could live in them and what kind of income they had. She heard that the driver called someone and asked which exit to take the girl to. After getting an answer, he drove into the gate of one of the mansions and parked the car. Vanessa sat in a small, cozy lobby, waiting for the personnel manager. He turned out to be a short man, slightly over 40, athletic and focused. "Vanessa, I'm the one who called you. Come on, I'll familiarize you with your duties, show you how everything works here." "Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to work and bringing me here. I'm so grateful." "You'll thank me when you've worked here. You'll thank me when you've worked here. You may think it's a tough job. A lot of people can't handle it. But in fact, if you try hard enough, you can do it all." "Do you have any cleaning skills?" "I hope so. I used to help my mom at work a lot." "What was Mom like?" "She was a nurse and a hospital nurse. I worked with her to make it easier for her." "Mom doesn't work now. Mom died a little over 2 weeks ago." Vanessa didn't notice the man clenching his jaw, as if in pain, but continued talking. "I'm sorry for your loss. We have a somewhat specific cleaning service. As you can see, the interior is very expensive. So for now, your duties will include cleaning the back rooms, the staff rooms, assisting the kitchen staff, let's just say interning on the sidelines. There will be 4 other girls interning with you. Only 2 will stay on. We're not fully staffed yet, so you could be useful in other jobs." "Is there anyone living in the house?" "Not yet. The owner lived abroad for a long time. The house was completed only last year and just the other day finished repair, decoration, and design. So we are still recruiting staff. If you work and show diligence, you will have quite decent positions." "Wages. Are you happy with it, by the way?" "I don't know, you haven't told me. I don't know." The man stopped so abruptly that Vanessa ran into him. "So you left your hometown and came to an unfamiliar metropolis without even finding out the terms of cooperation? What do I have to lose? I can't get a better job. I can always come back and get a job as a cleaner or a saleswoman. What have I got to lose?" Yes, only at 18 you can think so recklessly. It seemed that the last phrase was addressed to myself. How much will I get? Based on the fact that you are a non-professional, inexperienced employee, plus you will live here and be provided with uniforms and food, about $50,000 a month. For the first month you will work without days off, the man warned when he saw the girl's face stretch after the sum was announced. Are you serious? For a maid's job plus food, lodging and clothing is a dream. I don't quite understand you. Are you against it? I'm all for it. Yes, we're ready to work weekends, but also without lunch and sleep. Yes, just leave me alone. So you're happy with the terms? Yes. Great. Here's your room being set up. I'll see you downstairs in an hour. There'll be a general briefing and staff introductions. I'll be alone in the room? Of course. This isn't a dormitory. The landlord has a very human attitude towards people, including the servants. Thank you very much. Vanessa pressed herself against the man in a grateful impulse and felt for a moment that he wanted to respond to the embrace, but held back. Maybe in a hug, too. I think it's unnecessary, the man began, but Vanessa didn't listen. Thank you again. I'll do my best. I hope to see you in an hour. The uniforms are in the closet. For the first few minutes, Vanessa couldn't believe her happiness. More demanding girls might have thought, how can anyone be excited about the prospect of being a maid? But to her, it was fabulous luck, and she didn't want to miss the opportunity. Half an hour later, she was ready and standing in the hallway, trying to remember how to get to the lobby where all the staff was supposed to gather. The corridor was empty. It was quiet outside the room doors. The girl regretted not looking around as she walked and completely forgot to ask for directions to the lobby. Finally, she managed to get to the stairs, going down into a spacious room. The employees were already starting to gather there. Several girls, apparently also maids, were already drinking, getting acquainted and chatting. Besides them were the cook, several of his assistants, the gardener, the guards, the head maid, and the driver, who had brought Vanessa. The girl was just about to approach the others to get acquainted. But at that moment, the man who was introducing her to the house walked in. Suddenly, she realized that she hadn't even asked his name. That's a really strange impression she made on him, without asking his name, or working conditions, or the size of his salary. But she packed up and drove from her hometown to huge New York. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm Alan, the house manager. I'm going to introduce you to the house rules. Most of the information you've already received. In addition, each of you has a small handout in your room regarding your responsibilities. I suggest you study them, especially for those who have no experience. The house is new, and the owners will move in only in a month. During this time, you and I need to get used to it and learn to work together as a team. You'll find the daily schedule in the room. We'll start living by it tomorrow. Today, familiarization with the house, responsibilities. I warn at once, personal relations, violation of discipline, bad habits, the reason for dismissal without clarification. For all this, you will have a weekend in the house. You are obliged to behave with dignity. The master is a man strict, conservative. Living in the house, he will be with his spouse and son. Perhaps his son's sweetheart will live in the house. How old are they all? One of the maid girls asked. The master's name is David. He and his wife Addison are 45. His son Matthew is 23. His girlfriend Ciara is just over 18. If I'm not mistaken. Our host is the owner of a large gemstone mining and processing corporation. His wife is the owner of a jewelry manufacturing firm. His son has recently finished his studies in England and will help his father in his business. But for any questions, you should contact me. Try to keep contact with family members to a minimum. They are reserved people, and this many strangers is also very stressful for them. They will bring in a staff member to clean their private rooms and serve at the table. It's complicated, said one of the girls. If you are not satisfied with these complications, you can always tell me and we will find a replacement for you, the man said calmly. No, I'm fine with it. Vanessa listened and could not believe her own ears. How far this world was from the one she lived in. Vanessa spent half the day learning the rules and duties, the routines. She walked around the part of the house where she was to work. Vanessa got to know all the staff. She was in such a confused state that she could not fully comprehend the amount of change that had taken place in her life. Perhaps it is only when you are young that you can be so carefree to enjoy everything and change your life so easily. From the next day, her labor career began. Accustomed to labor, the girl did not experience special difficulties, quickly performing the entire amount of work. It was for this that the other maids began to dislike her. The work, designed for the whole day, she performed in a few hours, not distracted by conversations. As a result, Alan began to grumble at the others, who were much less eager to work than Vanessa. By the end of the month, the entire staff had settled in, learned their duties, and established interpersonal relationships. Fortunately, fears of romance at work were completely unfounded. Almost all of the adult staff were married, and the maid girls were not interested in the single Alan, the driver, an unloved and withdrawn guy in his 30s. He was also to fulfill the duties of a security guard should the need arise. From one day to the next, the arrival of the family was awaited. Their rooms were ready the day before their arrival. Their assistant Chloe arrived to check on the final preparations. She appeared to be a stern and collected woman whose age was impossible to determine. She was equally likely to be in her 30s or 50s. One day, Vanessa decided to ask Alan a question that had been bothering her for a long time. "Alan, please tell me, why do you never call anyone by their middle name, everyone, including yourself? Do you introduce only by first name?" "It's a habit we picked up while we were living in England. There are no middle names there. Everyone calls each other by first or last name. David and Addison should be called that too, but I told you not to go near them yet." "I remember." The arrival of the hosts was not a special event for the staff. The cook cooked lunch, got orders for dinner. Chloe herself gave all the orders, working surprisingly well with Alan. The young maid girl suggested that they might well be having an affair. For dinner, they waited for the arrival of Ciara, the future daughter-in-law of the owners. The girl had been born and raised in Russia, but had spent the last few years in England, where she had met Matthew. The girl's father had a brilliant career, so she was a favorable party. She was to be surprised and charmed. What was Vanessa's surprise when she recognized her former classmate in the girl who arrived, the same one who had made her school years a living hell. Vanessa realized that as soon as Ciara saw her and recognized her, her days in this house would be numbered. So she had to do everything to make sure that the girl, the daughter-in-law of the master's son, did not notice her. Fortunately, the young people just a couple of weeks later went on vacation to one of the resorts. Sitting in the city in the summer was really unbearable. One day, Vanessa came running into one of the rooms, checking the dust on the top shelf of a massive closet. Getting to it with her short stature was impossible. She had to use a small ladder. Engrossed in her work, she didn't immediately notice she wasn't alone in the room. That's why when Matthew, who was watching her, coughed softly, she flinched, lost her balance, and fell down the stairs. Although the stairs were not high, the bruise from the fall could have been quite painful and serious if Matthew hadn't caught her on the fly. Tall and athletic, he picked up the petite girl as if she were nothing. For a few moments he held her in his arms, keeping his admiring gaze on her. It was the first time Vanessa had ever caught such a look of admiration. Since high school, she had been accustomed to thinking of herself as inconspicuous, unassuming, unworthy of attention. In college, the situation was no different. The few boys paid no attention to her, which, combined with her unremarkable appearance, made her insecure. But now, when she was held in the arms of a stunningly handsome, tall, strong, and confident young man, literally eating her up with his eyes, Vanessa felt confident, strong, and charming, as if she were wearing a stunning outfit rather than a modest uniform. "I apologize if I startled you," Matthew said. His voice was like black velvet, enveloping me with softness. Vanessa said, "I'm very grateful to you. Could you put me down on the floor? Someone might come in. It would be a bad situation. I can explain everything to them." Matthew didn't seem to think of obeying her request, as if he realized that what she was saying was the exact opposite of what she wanted. "I have to insist," she said. Putting Vanessa on the floor, he held her in his arms for a few moments, pressing her gently against him and not letting her break free. Unable to tear her gaze away from him, Vanessa admired the perfect appearance of her master's son. Those rare moments when she did get to see him, she thought only of avoiding Ciara's eyes. Looking at her fiancé was something Vanessa dared not think about. But now she stood in the embrace of his strong arms and could think of nothing but how beautiful these moments were. As if with great regret, the young man unclasped his hands, releasing the girl. It should be noted, he did it very timely. Vanessa had no sooner taken a couple of steps toward the door than Lucinda entered the living room through the other entrance. "Honey, there you are. I've been looking all over for you," she said. Hearing the familiar voice behind her, Vanessa hurried to retrace her steps and hide in the nearest room. Closing the door and leaning against it, she tried to calm her frantic heartbeat for a few minutes. She herself couldn't answer exactly what caused it, the unexpected meeting with Chiara or the embrace of her fiancé. I should be more careful, Vanessa thought. Today she'll notice me, tomorrow she'll remember me. And the day after tomorrow I'll go back to my small town. Since that day, the girl tried her best not to be seen by any of the owners of the house, but it was much more difficult to command her heart. And is it possible at the age of 18? Vanessa fell in love with the son of the owner and could not command her heart not to long for the handsome young man, despite the fact that she had no chance to reciprocate. The next week passed relatively quietly. Matthew and Ciara went to Peterhof and stayed there for a week at the boyfriend's friend's house. Vanessa got a break and could move around the house more or less calmly and fulfill her duties with full dedication. The girl also saw the owners rarely and hardly ever encountered them in person. Alan, noting the responsibility of the staff, periodically made small changes in the staff or reassignment of duties. For example, Vanessa was assigned to clean the guest rooms and all those rooms where the owners were present. And although in this case the probability of crossing with them increased, the girl did not dare to disobey the manager. To avoid being accused of something terrible, Vanessa decided to tell Alan about what Chiara had done to her. What was the reason? The man asked after listening to her story. I don't know. As far as I could tell, the guys didn't know either. It was just something she didn't like. And then she found all sorts of reasons to hate me more and more. Well, she's gone now, so you can work in peace. Well, she's gone. Besides, they're getting married in the fall, and then they're going on a honeymoon, after which she'll start school. She won't have time for you. She probably doesn't remember you. How long has it been since you've seen her? A little over 3 years. At the mention of the upcoming wedding of her lover and former classmate, Vanessa's legs nearly gave out. She didn't think the happy event would happen so soon. Don't worry, it's good that you warned me. Don't worry. How come you were in the same class as her? Her dad was from the local government back then and wanted to show how close he was to the people, which didn't stop his daughter from showing us what dirt we are, basically. Yeah, tough luck for you. But why have I learned to ignore people like Ciara? Like your mom? The man's voice broke out involuntarily, but he didn't even seem to notice. How do you know what my mom was like? Vanessa was surprised. You told me. It was obvious that Alan was embarrassed and didn't know what to say. Maybe he said it last. The next day, Vanessa met the owner of the house for the first time. She was cleaning the table of photos, humming her mother's favorite song. At that moment, David entered the room. Jessica, he said involuntarily when he saw the girl. No, I'm Vanessa. I'm sorry, I didn't know you'd be home at this time. Alan told us to do the cleaning in your absence. That's okay. Go ahead and work. I won't interrupt you. You just remind me of someone I know. My mom's name was Jessica, too, David said unexpectedly. Vanessa continued working. At Alan's insistence, the staff tried not to engage in conversation with the owner. She didn't see the man's face change, as if he had seen a ghost in front of him. The next day, Alan told her that Chloe and the landlady were away on business, and in their absence she would be responsible for cleaning the owner's rooms. Why me? I thought I was only allowed to clean the hallways and the living room. It's David's personal order, Alan replied. It was obvious that he was not happy with this decision. Vanessa was not going to argue with her boss, so she went to clean David's room, assuming that he had already left for work. The huge apartment, furnished in classical style, decorated in gray pastel colors, reminded her of a trip to a museum. She spent a few minutes looking at the rich furnishings, which were different from what was in the rest of the house. That was why she did not immediately notice that her host had not left, but was sitting in a deep armchair by the window, apparently immersed in his thoughts. The girl's first impulse was to go out and return later. But at that moment the man raised his hand, in which he held an old photo from his seat. It was perfectly visible who was depicted on it. The black and white photo showed a happy couple standing, embraced on the seashore. The young man was David, only much younger by about 20 years. And the girl Vanessa recognized her mother. It was the very photo she had found after her mom's funeral. Only in her mom's photo, the man was ripped off. Unable to restrain the first impulse, the girl said, "Where did you get a photo of my mom?" David flinched. He seemed to be so absorbed in his thoughts that he didn't notice her entering. Quickly putting the photo away, he stood up and got ready to leave the room. "You didn't answer," Vanessa stopped him. "You made a mistake. That's me and my wife when we were young. My mom has the exact same photo, only you're torn off. And your wife is the same height as you. That's my petite mom in the photo. How do you know her?" Vanessa looked into the man's eyes. Many times she had read in books that in the eyes you can find the answer to all questions, and she had never understood how that was possible. Now, looking at the pain reflected in them, the girl realized what the man could not say out loud. "You're my father," she said. David took a deep breath and turned away from the window. Apparently, it was easier for him to talk that way. "Yes, but I didn't know Jessica had a baby for a long time. When we broke up, I had Alan keep an eye on her, watch her from afar, help her if she needed it. A year later, however, he told me he'd met Jessica. She absolutely refused any help or any mention of me at all. It turns out he didn't stop looking after you. When you were orphaned, he was the one who made sure you were placed in our home. And you didn't know about this?" "No, not until yesterday. He wanted to keep you close so you wouldn't get into trouble. He hoped I wouldn't recognize you. Basically, he had the right idea. We weren't planning on living in this house for long. The chances of us crossing paths were minimal. But why did you and Mom break up? Do you have any idea? I had a family, a kid, Jessica. And Jessica was just a temporary fling. A distraction from the family routine," the girl finished harshly. "No, you're wrong," David objected. "She was never just an infatuation for me. Not her. She and I met here in Chicago. She was visiting the museum, and I had business nearby. We bumped into each other, got to talking. Then walked around the city until midnight. I just lost my head so much that I sent my family overseas and flew on vacation with Jessica. She was so sweet, so pure, so light, so trusting. I was serious about divorcing Addison and marrying your mom. What stopped you from doing that?" "My father. When he found out what I was doing, he was quick to bring me back down to earth. Our business was completely dependent on Addison's father. If I'd left her, my father-in-law would have left us with nothing. At best. At worst, we'd be found somewhere out of town. And it wasn't just my life I was risking. Jessica wouldn't have survived either. I couldn't lie any further, so I told the truth. She was broken and crushed. In the end, she asked me to leave her and never come into her life again. I couldn't just let her disappear. I offered to move to Chicago so I could see her once in a while." "And what did she do? Did you know your mother well?" "She refused," Vanessa replied. "Of course she did. I haven't seen her since, but my father asked Alan to keep an eye on her. Well, you know the rest. I saw the deed to the apartment, so Alan gave it to me. I didn't realize who he was at the time. I see now. Maybe he didn't tell me about it. I didn't know about you until yesterday. I mean, the best person to ask is Alan, I guess. I was having a hard time with our breakup. I wanted to go to her and apologize, but suddenly I got the news that Matthew was very ill. I got on the same flight to see him. My father did everything he could to save Matthew, and I came back as late as possible. When I got back, Alan said Jessica was missing, and he couldn't find any trace of her. That's probably when you showed up, and that's how he kept you from me. Maybe he did the right thing. Knowing that my beloved had a child with me, I could hardly resist leaving everything for you. But you had a child in your family too." "Yes, I did," David said absently, and turned back to the window. Vanessa decided that the conversation was over and left the room quietly. As she was about to close the door, she realized and asked, "Can I continue working here?" "I won't say anything to anyone, I promise." "You're just like your mother. You're not a mercenary," David replied. "I don't know what you mean." "Of course you can stay, but promise not to tell anyone about anything. If I may, it's going to be hard to explain now." Back in her room, Vanessa took a long time to come to her senses. The man she had never dreamed of meeting turned out to be her master, the owner of a huge fortune and family. Vanessa tried not to think about it at all. After all, now it turned out that she had fallen in love with her own brother for the first time. Now her love was not only unrequited, hopeless, but also criminal. Incestuous. She had to forbid herself to even think about it. The ideal would be to quit this house and forget this family like a bad dream. About demanding something from her father, the girl did not even think about it. After sitting in the room for about half an hour, Vanessa decided to find Alan and consult with him. Besides, she wanted to question him, because he almost certainly knew she was the owner's daughter when he invited her to work in his house. Besides, she hadn't fulfilled her duties, and she was used to working responsibly. Right now, though, the thing she wanted most was to pack her things and leave for her hometown. Probably my mother also decided almost 20 years ago, when she refused all the benefits offered by my father, refused to destroy his family. Although she herself, with great difficulty, was able to raise her daughter on her feet. Maybe that's why she left life so early? There was a knock at the door. Vanessa realized she'd been in the room for quite some time. Did they notice her absence? Alan was at the door. "We need to talk," he said, and gestured for her to follow him. Vanessa thought it would be about her and the fact that she had learned the secret of her birth. However, judging by how tense and even angry the man was, the girl guessed that something similar had happened. "What do you think you're doing?" Alan asked. "What are you talking about?" Vanessa feigned innocence. "And pretending to be an innocent fool. And pretending to be an innocent fool. She's making a spectacle of herself here, saying that Ciara might slander you, and she's hanging herself around Matthew's neck." "I didn't hang myself. I fell down the stairs. He caught me. And at 12 this afternoon, I've been bombarded with questions about who he is and where he's from. I don't know where he is or how he's acting. I was checking the dust in the closet. Standing on the stairs, he quietly walked in. I lost my balance, almost fell. That's the whole story of our interaction. I swear to you. Learn, girl. I won't allow you to interfere in the lives of family members." "You won't? Then why did you bring me here? Or are you telling me you didn't know who the owner was? Or didn't you buy my mom an apartment when I was born? Didn't you look after her? You didn't find me?" "It doesn't matter. I just have one question for you. Why?" Alan didn't seem to be so much taken aback by the news as by the fierce intensity with which she spoke. "How do you know everything?" he wondered. "You probably haven't noticed that I look remarkably like my mother, but my father did. Besides, I saw a photo of them together, so there's no reason for me to be messing around with my own brother." Still not recovered, the man sat down and was silent for a few minutes, as if gathering his thoughts and choosing words. Finally, he spoke. "Yes, I did buy the apartment for Jessica. Because David had done her an injustice. He had no right to leave her like that, like a tired toy. Not her. Pride wouldn't let her tell him about the baby. Pride wouldn't let her ask for money to support her. That's why I didn't tell him anything about you. He just had no right to know that he had a child. His baby is his own. His own. But he'd already had Matthew by then. Yeah, another baby. I fell in love with her, and I wanted her to be my wife. I'd raise you like a daughter, take care of you and mommy. But she loved your father and chose him again. Again. Don't you think there's too much you're leaving out?" Vanessa asked. "I don't need the whole truth. It doesn't concern me. Why did you bring me here?" "I wanted to keep you under supervision. I didn't think he'd recognize you. I didn't think he'd recognize you, that Matthew would be interested in you. You're just a child. You're not old enough to live on your own. That's why I found you, invited you to work here." "I can't stay here anymore," Vanessa said. "I'm sorry, but it's beyond me." "Why not? What's stopping you? Did David ask you to do this?" "No, he asked me not to tell anyone yet." "So stay here for now. I'll decide what's best." "Okay." While Vanessa was thinking of an answer, Alan got a call. "What? Where is he? Is he alive? What hospital is he in?" the man exclaimed. A moment later, he sprinted out of the room and rushed toward the service exit. Vanessa remained, not realizing what had happened. By late afternoon, it was learned that Matthew, while riding out of town in an automobile, had been involved in an accident. The likelihood that he would be alive was minimal. From the news, Vanessa could hardly stand on her feet. David rushed to see his son at the hospital. Alan was there too. The others had to wait to see if the young man would survive the night. By morning, it was reported that the boy needed a blood transfusion, and a few hours later it became known that the injuries were much more serious than the doctors had decided the day before. A lot of blood was needed. In addition, the guy had a rather rare group, the fourth negative. In such a situation, the ideal donor could be someone close to him. Vanessa's first impulse was to offer herself as a donor, but her Rh factor was positive. She was surprised by this. She had known since high school that children inherited their father's Rh factor, so it had to be the same for her and Matthew. Meanwhile, the search for a suitable donor was unsuccessful, and time was literally counting by minutes. Close relatives and all those who were in the hospital at the time were checked for a match. Unexpectedly, Alan turned out to be a suitable donor candidate. No one paid any attention to it at the time. Everyone was alarmed by the guy's condition and was glad that he would live. Recovery took quite a long time. The young and healthy body was taking its toll despite the serious injuries. Chiara was sent back to England by her father so as not to upset her. Besides, the school year was starting and the girl was just beginning her studies. The wedding due to the accident had to be postponed. It seemed that neither the bride nor the groom was particularly upset by this news. At the end of August, Matthew was discharged from the hospital. Vanessa, who all this time tried not to show her father in front of her eyes and not to remember about her inappropriate feelings for her brother, realized that her idea to go home at the beginning of summer was the most reasonable. It turned out that Alan had interrogated her on the day of the accident for a reason. Matthew had shared his plans for Vanessa with him. The guy really fell in love and planned to leave the bride imposed by her father. He was not at all embarrassed by the fact that his beloved was a maid and that his father would be furious when he found out about everything. He decided to share his plans with someone he had grown accustomed to trusting since childhood. Uncle Alananu, his father's assistant and longtime friend, had actually raised the boy. In many ways, Matthew trusted him much more, so he decided to confide his plans for his upcoming marriage to him as well. Trust him and ask for advice. Alan realized that the boy's youth and inexperience could ruin not only his life and career, but also hurt his father. In his first impulse, Alan wanted to send Vanessa back to her hometown. His plans were thwarted by an accident, and then he realized that he was doing to Matthew exactly the same thing his father had once done to David when he forced him to leave Jessica. However, he wasn't going to let their relationship go as far. Another naive, jilted girl and another unhappy child. No, that wasn't what Alan was going to allow. He made the decision to give them time to work things out. Maybe this relationship would work itself out. Or maybe there was no love affair, just a desire to go against his father's plans, so he decided not to get involved. Besides, it had been over 2 months, and the infatuation with the girl might have worn off in the young man's head. Unfortunately for him, Matthew not only did not forget about his infatuation with the young maid, but from the first day he decided to take active steps. And the first step was a huge bouquet, which Vanessa found under her door the next morning. There was no envelope with an indication of the giver, but it was not required. There were, and could be, no options. Vanessa decided to nip his advances in the bud. Entering the young man's room, she caught him warming up. After a month of forced bed rest and recovery from fractures, the guy decided to make up for lost time. His leg was still in a cast after a bad fracture, but he had already asked to have arm exercisers installed in the room. The moment Vanessa walked in, he was working out while listening to music through headphones. He couldn't hear her enter, and she froze, seeing him so perfect, so athletic. Apollo in a cast. Considering that she'd hardly had relationships or attention from guys before, she wanted to give in to his advances, if only for a short time, and then tell him everything, or silently disappear and live the rest of her life in happy memories. She must have been too deep in thought, because Matthew had noticed her presence and was saying something to her. I'm glad Vanessa seemed to have listened to the most important part of the conversation, considering how wide and happy the guy was smiling. I'm sorry, I was listening. What were you talking about? I was saying that I'm going to break up with her today and tell my dad. Tell him what? I guess I hit my head a little, Matthew joked. I couldn't help it, and I can hear you. I can't understand why you make decisions that affect me without asking my opinion. I thought you liked me too. There's a very, very, very big difference between liking you and running to the ends of the earth with you. But for example, you and I haven't met. I'm a maid. You're a millionaire's son. I'm a college graduate. You're a prestigious foreign university. You're rich and famous, I'm not. I wanted to finish, but she didn't dare. I don't see the problem. We've got plenty of time to get to know each other. How old are you? 19 soon. Great. Plenty of time to get a decent education. It's not like I'm dragging you to the wedding on your doorstep like Ciara and I did. Let's just be around each other and get to know each other. I like you a lot, and I can't believe you don't feel the same way about me. With those words, Matthew reached out his arms to her and gently pulled her to him. She should have resisted, should have turned away, should have pulled away and pushed him away. Great came a familiar voice. I'm gone for a couple weeks, and he's already smirking, with some girl. A furious Ciara stood in the doorway, glaring at the couple. Ciara, what are you doing here? Matthew didn't seem bothered by the fact that he was kissing another girl in front of his fiancée. He didn't even open his arms, still holding Vanessa to his chest. The same ones you did. You're so shameless. Now let her go. I don't know who you're hugging. It would have been nice if she was a famous model. Stop, Ciara shouted, yanking Vanessa's arm away from Matthew. I can't believe it. The maid. What are you doing here anyway? You haven't changed a bit. You're still the same ugly gray mouse. Ciara, stop it. Matthew stood up for Vanessa, not surprised that the girls knew each other. What are you, silent? Did you choke on your tongue as usual? What brings you here? Are you trying to get back at me? You sneak into my fiancé's house and get into bed with him. Don't get your hopes up, you won't get him. Ciara, you're wrong, Vanessa tried to justify herself. I took a job in this house, not knowing that it would soon be yours. I came to Matthew's room to see if he needed anything cleaned or brought in, and I accidentally fell on his lips. And he asked me to help him up out of his chair. I did, Ciara finished. You've never been good at lying, but now you decided to try. Well, that's a ridiculous excuse to fall for. Anyway, she turned to her fiancé. It's going to stop today, or else, well, she knows it will be otherwise. With that, the girl left the room, slamming the door so that a painting fell from the wall. The glass shattered into several dozen pieces, one of which bounced off and hurt Matthew's hand. Damn, what a fury. He laughed, trying to pull the shard out of the wound. Let me help, Vanessa said on impulse. But after a couple of minutes, Vanessa regretted it, because she found herself pressed against the door. The young man, not waiting for her to object, kissed her. Her legs gave out and she would have fallen if he hadn't put his arms around her. Gathering her will in a fist, she managed to pull away and say, "Don't ever do that again." But you liked it, didn't you? The guy grinned and reached for her for another kiss. This time Vanessa managed to dodge. I have to clean this place up, she said, ducking out the door and trying to hide in her room as quickly as possible. After catching her breath, she went back to the kitchen, grabbed a dustpan and broom, and headed for Matthew's room. This time he was fully dressed and sitting in front of the TV. Calm down? Let's continue. I'm here to clean up the glass, Vanessa said. I hope you won't hurt your hand with anything else. Not anymore. But you didn't remove that shard from me either. If you behave like this, it'll stay in your hand, and you'll let it, Matthew said mockingly. And if it starts to get blood poisoning and I die without glory or honor? The young man's voice was enveloping and made him think of anything but work. No, I can't let David get blood poisoning, Vanessa said. No, you can't. He was the only one with the right blood. He's had a lot of it pumped out of him. You were the same blood before. No one else had such a rare bloodline. Not even your parents, Vanessa blurted out. She was about to bite her tongue off for that last sentence, because Matthew clung to her like a bulldog. What's weird, your parents don't have a band like mine. I misspoke. And anyway, I have to go. Or you're not going anywhere until you explain what you meant. Matthew's tone went from playful to affectionate to categorical, unapologetic. I didn't mean anything, except that children most often inherit their parents' RH factor, Vanessa said hastily. If I remember my biology course well, if a child has it negative, it means that he took it from his parents or one of them. So if my parents have it positive and I have it negative, I'm a foundling? No, why? Maybe your father's RH factor is positive. Usually children inherit it from their father. But I'm not sure, I don't know. We should go to the hospital, she suggested. The boy seemed to understand everything and began to reason out loud. Alan's father is an acquaintance from childhood. They were friends. Alan devoted his whole life to sports, and his father went into business. When he was able to make good money, he invited Alan to become a personal security guard. Gradually, he took on other responsibilities such as running the house. Always together, always there for each other. Never a quarrel. And now Alan becomes the only suitable donor for me. Well, maybe you don't know and someone else helped? Vanessa suggested. There are all sorts of reasons why a person can't be a donor illnesses. For example, maybe your mom with the same rhesus. Vanessa regretted 100 times that she had voiced her doubts aloud. No, only Alan's Matthew cut her off. He seemed oblivious to the fact that Vanessa was still in the room. He gestured toward the door, signaling that she should leave the room. He picked up the phone from the table and dialed a familiar number. You can come to my room. It's an emergency. The guy shouted after he heard an attempted objection. Going downstairs, Vanessa ran into Alan on the stairs, who was walking with quick steps towards Matthew's room. Finishing her business, the girl returned to her room and began packing. It was naive to believe that she was in a position to fight this. It had some incomprehensible magical power over her, making her lose her will and her mind. The consequences could be most unpredictable and terrible. So she should have left the house, returned to her own place, and thought about how to live further, how and what to earn money for. About demanding from her father financial help or his participation in her life. The girl did not even think about it. She wanted to forget this page of her life. No sooner had she packed her things than the phone rang. It was Alan. He asked her to come up to Matthew's room. His voice was calm but strange. I told you not to go where you don't belong. Alan greeted her with those words as soon as she could enter. Wait, don't scare her before she's ready. Maybe things can still work out very well. Matthew cheered up after talking to Alan, as if he had heard great news. I don't understand what's going on, Vanessa said. Alan, I wanted to ask you to pay me back. I can't stay here any longer. Of course, you've made a mess, and you're in the bushes. No, darling, you're not going to do it now. No, dear, you're not going anywhere now, Alan grinned. Matthew tried to grab the girl's hand. The attempt, however, was unsuccessful, and he fell back onto the bed where he had been sitting. Vanessa instinctively rushed over to him for support. I told you she loves me too, Matthew laughed, standing up easily and hugging the girl. I see that history is repeating itself again. And your father will not be happy about this news. Alan shook his head. Not to mention your fiancée and her father. My fiancée is in front of you, Matthew objected. Will someone please explain to me what's even going on here? Vanessa pulled out of Matthew's embrace. She looked from one to the other, trying to figure out what they were hiding. Alan, tell me. She knows half of this terrible secret anyway. Besides, she thinks she's in love with her brother. And don't argue, I can see that you like me, the guy said when the girl tried to get indignant. Judy, sit down. This is going to be a long conversation, Alan said. David and I grew up in the same neighborhood. Ever since kindergarten, we've done every mischief together. Never fought. Always helping each other out. We lived like that for almost 10 years until a military family moved in next door. The incoming officer and his wife had a beautiful daughter, Addison. As you can imagine, that's Matthew's mom. We were both crazy about her, chasing her around like puppies. And we weren't the only ones. She was the star of the school within a year. Nobody even noticed her at first. And then we graduated and moved away. And we met at the New Year's Eve ball at school, not knowing what David had charmed her with. They had an affair. But I didn't want to give up either, even though I couldn't stand in the way of their happiness. So I finally confessed everything to her and gave her a choice. She chose David? Vanessa asked. No, she did what a real woman would do. She stayed with one man and got pregnant by another, Matthew said angrily. Don't you dare say that. It's your mother. Alan almost punched the young man in the face. Matthew, stop it. Alan, what happened next? Tell me. As crude as it sounds, Matthew expressed the essence of what happened, Alan said. She did choose David, and she gave me a generous gift that I couldn't have hoped for on the last night. Who would have thought that was the night she'd get pregnant? Yeah. So that's why you have the same blood type? Vanessa guessed. Yeah, I've suspected that for a long time, Matthew said. I look a lot like you. The same habits. My father and I were always like strangers. When did you find out that Addison's baby was your son? When she and David set a wedding date, I decided to leave. Stay out of the way. I signed a contract and joined the army. Came back almost 6 years after I was wounded. No family, no money. David found me and invited me to stay with him. The first time I saw Matthew, I knew he was my son. I don't know how the others didn't see it. That's around the time David met Jessica. I thought to myself, this is my chance. Jessica's gonna leave, and I'm gonna marry Addison. And we'll all be happy, Alan said. Yeah, happy, Matthew queried. Did you forget that in the world of money, no one's happy? Yeah, you're right. And Addison had made it clear to me that she didn't want me. To be honest, I'd grown cold to her during the separation. So I helped David cover up the whole Jessica thing. I bought her an apartment while I looked after her. You fell in love? Vanessa asked. You sure did. We even have the same taste in women. Only Jessica remained faithful to her first, and only loved for the rest of her life. Yeah, Mom never looked at another man after that, Matthew confirmed. Well, it was a story that was gradually forgotten. David took his family abroad. I went with them. I lived in 2 countries. And when Jessica was gone, I decided to move Vanessa closer to me so I could keep an eye on her. Addison and his son decided to come back to America too? Vanessa guessed. And then you know the rest, my friends. I don't know how you fell in love, but this guy interrogated me today. I had to come clean. So you're Matthew's father? Vanessa asked. Does David know? No, I don't think so. Anyway, we've never talked about it. Yeah, it's a real passion, Vanessa shook her head. It's like a movie. It's better than that, Matthew grinned. Now, I don't know if my alleged father will send me away and bequeath all his millions to you. Matthew, stop it. It's not funny. That's not funny. It's only fair, really. And I won't have to marry you or your daughter. I mean, he doesn't need me to make family connections with his business partners. Hey, I'm a good sport about this. Hey, I'm a good sport about this. You're going to be a rich heiress, and I'm going to get you again. Then I'll have the money again. Matthew seemed to be enjoying the situation. I wouldn't be so happy if I were you, Vanessa said. I think we should keep it a secret. At least for now, Alan said. I mean, Dad, are you crazy? Where's the secrecy going to go from here? So for a quarter of a century, everyone was silent. And it's not like David hadn't guessed anything. I suggest we get everyone together at the family council and confess everything. Have a night of revelations, Matthew suggested. It turns out that both parents were dishonest, both cheated and both had children on the side. Yourself? Alan questioned. But in fact, I'm an illegitimate child too. I'm not sure everyone will be as thrilled, Vanessa replied. I'm sure we can't keep quiet, Matthew insisted. Let's do it this way. I'll tell David myself. And then we'll think about it. The 3 of them went about their business. And not knowing that the capricious and resentful Ciara had already complained to her father about her fiancé Matthew. The man had never been known for his gentle nature, being resentful and suspicious. The fact that his potential partner couldn't keep his son in line meant that he would be just as soft in business, and he didn't want to do business with such people. By the time Alan had persuaded Matthew and Vanessa to keep quiet and not tell anyone what they'd learned, Ciara's father had already ordered the withdrawal of his investments in all of David's projects. Breaking up the deals threatened to lose large sums of money. Not getting a clear answer from his subordinates, David went home in a frenzy to seek an answer from his son. And the first person he saw in Matthew's room was his newfound daughter Vanessa in his son's arms. "How dare you?" David screamed at Vanessa. "Did you purposely show up to destroy my family? I will crush you to dust." "And you, puppy," he said to Matthew, "get dressed immediately and go to your fiancée. I don't care how, but you will beg her forgiveness. You'll restore the engagement. Her father will get his money back, invested in my business. And I'll deal with you later," he said to Vanessa. "I wouldn't be in such a hurry," Matthew replied. "Besides, you can't tell me what to do. I'm not even your subordinate, let alone anything more." "What did you say?" David was outraged. "I'll take everything away from you. You'll forget what expensive cars and resorts look like, where you used to spend my money." "I'm scared," Matthew replied calmly. "I'm already educated. Thank you, I'm sure, but you can't take it away. But you can't take it away from me. I'll take care of the rest." "You've never earned a penny in your life. You've never earned a penny in your life. Now you're showing a little attitude," David continued to shout. "I'm a grown man. As soon as I'm in shape, I'll leave your apartment. What's the holdup? I can have the room today. I think it's rightfully yours for your child to occupy." "Yes, Dad," Matthew said calmly. "Or did you think that your little secret of having a daughter out of wedlock would remain a secret?" David turned pale and sat back in his chair. He seemed suddenly short of breath. "What makes you think that?" he hissed. "Oh, don't say that. I have the courage to confess. And bonus, you get one more little secret. But just in case you think I'm hugging my own sister, Matthew." "What are you talking about?" David shook his head. "Yeah, so he didn't know. Well, Alan wanted to tell you, but I beat him to it." "Tell me what? Dad, have you known this your whole life?" Matthew stared at his father. "Didn't you ever see anything in me in common with him? Even I had my doubts as a child, when he and I had common tastes and interests." "That's impossible. Addison was faithful to me," David said stubbornly. "By and large, yes. They had a little adventure with your friend before you got married. That's why he moved away, so that he wouldn't interfere with your happiness." "You're wrong about what? That I'm his son?" Matthew asked. "I assure you I only found out today. Or rather, I guessed it, thanks to your clever and attentive daughter Vanessa. It was in her bright head came the idea that the parents with a positive Rh factor, having the second type of blood, cannot have a child with the fourth negative. Genetics is a scary, stubborn, and surprisingly accurate in such matters. I checked. Vanessa was right. The fact that Alan was the only suitable donor only made her suspicious." "And you should have warned us all," Matthew continued wryly. "Why? Because you should have been in school, not skipping classes." Vanessa looked at Matthew and couldn't believe her own eyes. In just one morning, he had gone from a sweet and handsome boy to a tough and sarcastic one. He seemed to enjoy seeing the effect his words had on David. Meanwhile, the man was getting worse, as he unbuttoned his shirt collar and loosened the knot of his tie. From the change in his complexion, his condition was alarming. "Matthew, stop it," Vanessa exclaimed. "You can see he needs help." Grabbing the phone, she called an ambulance. Then she called Alan and David's driver. Together, they managed to carefully take the man downstairs to the exit, where the ambulance was already arriving. The girl decided to accompany her newfound father to the hospital. She instructed Alan to talk to Matthew so he wouldn't do anything stupid again. David was taken to the hospital just in time. On the background of high blood pressure and stress, he had a stroke. Fortunately, there were doctors nearby, which meant that it was hoped that the consequences would not be so devastating. The man stayed in hospital for about 2 weeks, after which there was a long period of rehabilitation. Vanessa lived between the hospital and home. Even though her father had received excellent care at the expensive hospital, she was terrified to even imagine that she could lose her last loved one, barely finding him. She'd only crossed paths with Matthew a couple times in all this time. He, too, seemed to have lost interest in her. As soon as the cast was removed from her leg, Matthew moved out of the house without telling her where he was going. Before he left, he contacted his mother, who was in Los Angeles, and warned her that she shouldn't show up at their new home yet, for her father had found out her little secret. "Don't feel bad about it," Addison replied. "He has one of his own." Suddenly, his illegitimate daughter, Ciara, had turned up and was now staying in his bed. He's probably already made her his sole heir. "So you have no business in LA," Matthew said sharply. "What daughter? What are you talking about?" "Matthew, your life with him has never been perfect," Addison replied. "So I don't think you're surprised by this news. Besides, he's a man, and men have a tendency to have affairs on the side. At least, I understand him. Besides, it's not your place to complain about him." "Hisham, how's he doing?" "He'll live. They got him to the hospital on time, and he's got the best doctors in the world." "Have you been to see him?" "No, why?" "As it turns out, I'm nothing to him now." "He raised you? Even if you didn't know he wasn't your father, he put all his heart, soul, love, and a lot of money into you." "Is that what you're saying?" "That too. How can you be so callous?" "I'm not callous. I'm sober. There's no point in me staying there now, which is why I'm calling you so you don't accidentally show up. I'm on the next flight out. It's a shame your health and the lives of your family don't mean anything to you. I'm sorry. In spite of everything, your father and I have been together for over 20 years. It's up to you. Don't be surprised to find a new mistress at home. Let me handle this." The next day, the woman was in New York. She decided to come home later and went to the hospital right after the airport. Her husband's condition was indeed quite satisfactory. Still, a healthy and fairly young body was able to cope with such a test. In the corridor, Addison met Vanessa. Surprisingly, the girl seemed completely different from how her son had presented her. Even though they had a romantic relationship looming, David was resting after his treatments, so the woman decided to ask Vanessa about him. Vanessa talked about David's well-being and the doctor's prognosis. Somehow, imperceptibly, the conversation turned to who Vanessa really was. The girl told how she herself had found out that her master was her father. How Matthew had guessed that Alan was his father. In fact, they hadn't noticed how they had talked for hours, sitting in the quiet hospital cafe. After talking to the girl, Addison went to her husband's room and Vanessa went home. She was to give the order to prepare a room for the mistress. Lately, she had taken over the housekeeper's duties and was doing a fine job with them. Alan was away on a business trip. Addison came home in the evening and was pleasantly surprised to see that they had prepared for her arrival. She said that they had discussed things with her husband calmly without mutual complaints or recriminations. In the end, they came to the conclusion that they would keep the family together, because many years had passed since their transgressions. Matthew David promised to help with his own business, and Vanessa to send to study. Now it was their mutual children. Besides, Vanessa had no one else but them. Sometimes life presents us with serious tests of willpower, kindness, loyalty, humanity. It is important not only to deal with the problem, but also to understand and learn the lesson. And the most important thing is to remain human in any situation. Vanessa was lucky. Life compensated her for the most difficult loss with several new acquisitions: family, prospects, opportunities, study. And although no one and nothing could replace her mother, now she could rely on her father.